Simple man walked into five-star hotel asking for help. Manager treated him badly, but receptionist was kind. What he did next surprised everyone. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. She offered a glass of water to a stranger in worn clothes. He was the billionaire owner, testing his employees. Her simple act of kindness was about to change everything. Charles Murphy had inherited a hotel empire, but what he discovered that day in his own lobby would shake him to his core. One woman saw past appearances to the human being beneath. Another saw only someone to dismiss and humiliate. In the marble halls of the Grandshire Metropolitan, where luxury meets judgment, two lives were about to collide in the most unexpected way. When the man in simple clothes returned the next morning in a $1,000 suit, someone would lose everything they thought they deserved. Someone else would gain everything they never dared to dream, because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one you least expect. And sometimes kindness is the most valuable currency of all. I am sorry, but this establishment caters to a very exclusive clientele. Margaret Sterling's voice carried the sharp edge of someone accustomed to wielding what little power she possessed. Perhaps you would be more comfortable at one of the budget motels downtown. Charles Murphy stood at the reception desk of the Grandshire Metropolitan, deliberately disheveled in a faded flannel shirt and worn jeans, a weathered backpack slung over his shoulder. His salt and pepper hair was purposely tousled, and he had not shaved in 2 days. To anyone observing, he appeared to be exactly what Margaret clearly believed him to be, someone who did not belong in a five-star hotel. I was just hoping to get some information about your rates, Charles said quietly, his voice carrying none of the authority that usually commanded boardrooms across the country. Maybe see if you have any availability for next week. Margaret's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the marble counter as she looked him up and down with undisguised disdain. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her navy blue suit spoke of someone trying very hard to project an image of sophistication. Mr. She paused, waiting for a name she clearly had no intention of remembering. Murphy? Charles Murphy. Mr. Murphy. The name rolled off her tongue like something distasteful. Our standard suites begin at $800 per night. Our presidential suite is $3,000 per night. I think you will find our pricing structure quite prohibitive for someone in your circumstances. Charles felt the familiar tightness in his chest that always came when he witnessed this particular brand of human cruelty. For 10 years, since inheriting the Grandshire Corporation from his late parents, he had suspected that some of his managers treated guests this way. But suspecting and witnessing were two entirely different experiences. Perhaps you could direct me to somewhere more appropriate for people like me, Charles said, his voice deliberately humble. Margaret's smile was razor-thin. The Travelers Inn on 5th Street offers very reasonable rates. I believe they cater to, she gestured vaguely at his appearance, a more diverse economic demographic. Margaret, the voice came from behind the counter, soft but firm. Excuse me, please. Charles turned his attention to the young woman who had spoken. She was perhaps in her early 30s, with chestnut brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and warm brown eyes that held something Margaret's did not, genuine kindness. Her nameplate read Rachel Evans, Senior Receptionist. Miss Evans, I am handling this particular inquiry, Margaret said, her tone warning. Of course, Rachel replied smoothly. I simply thought Mr. Murphy might appreciate some water while he considers his options. You look tired from your travels, sir. It must have been a long walk. Charles watched as Rachel moved with quiet efficiency, filling a crystal glass with ice water and setting it before him on the counter. The simple gesture struck him like a physical blow. In 30 seconds, This woman had shown him more human dignity than Margaret had managed in 5 minutes. "Thank you," Charles said, and meant it more than she could possibly know. "That is very kind of you." "Not at all." Rachel's smile was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way that spoke of someone who had not yet had the kindness trained out of her by years in the service industry. "Are you visiting our city for business or pleasure, Mr. Murphy?" Before Charles could answer, Margaret stepped forward, her face flushed with obvious irritation. "Miss Evans, I think Mr. Murphy was just leaving. We have discussed the pricing structure, and I believe he has determined that our hotel is not within his budget." "Actually," Rachel said, her voice remaining professionally pleasant, while her eyes flashed with something that looked very much like controlled anger. "Every guest deserves complete information before making their decision. Mr. Murphy, we do offer several packages that might interest you. Our weekend rates are significantly lower than weekday rates, and we have a local resident discount that might apply if you live within 50 miles of the city." Charles found himself studying Rachel's face as she spoke. There was something about the way she carried herself, a quiet dignity that suggested she understood exactly what was happening here and had chosen to take a stand. It was a small stand, perhaps, but it was a stand nonetheless. "That is very helpful information," Charles said. "I do live locally, about 20 minutes from here, actually." "Wonderful," Rachel said, reaching beneath the counter for a folder. "Let me print out our rate sheet for you. Our weekend packages include complimentary breakfast and parking, which can represent significant savings." Margaret's face had progressed from flushed to nearly purple. "Miss Evans, I hardly think it is necessary to waste hotel resources printing materials for someone who clearly cannot afford our services." The words hung in the air like a slap. Charles felt his jaw tighten, but more than that, he felt something else. A deep, abiding fury at the way this woman was treating both him and Rachel. More importantly, he was watching Rachel's reaction, and what he saw there told him everything he needed to know about her character. Rachel did not flinch. She did not back down. Instead, she looked Margaret directly in the eye and said, with perfect professional calm, "Every person who walks through our doors deserves to be treated with courtesy and respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived financial status. That is what hospitality means." "How dare you lecture me about hospitality?" Margaret snapped. "I have been in this industry for 20 years. I know exactly how to identify our target demographic, and I can assure you that this gentleman does not fit our profile." Charles watched this exchange with growing amazement. Rachel was risking her job to defend a complete stranger, and she was doing it with a grace and professionalism that spoke of genuine character. Meanwhile, Margaret was revealing herself to be exactly the kind of person who had no business working in hospitality, or perhaps working with human beings at all. "Your rate information, Mr. Murphy," Rachel said, sliding a folder across the counter to him. "Please take your time reviewing it. If you have any questions, I will be happy to help." Charles accepted the folder, noting that Rachel's hands were steady despite the obvious tension in the air. "Thank you, Miss Evans. You have been extraordinarily helpful." "It is my pleasure," Rachel said, and Charles believed she meant it. Margaret had apparently reached the end of her patience. "Security should remove this vagrant before he makes our legitimate guests uncomfortable. This is a 5-star establishment, not a homeless shelter." The words hit Charles like a physical blow, but they seemed to hit Rachel even harder. Her face went pale, and for the first time, her professional composure cracked slightly. "Margaret," she said, her voice very quiet, "that is completely inappropriate." "What is inappropriate?" Margaret said, her voice rising, "is allowing people like him to loiter in our lobby. He is clearly not a legitimate guest, and frankly, his presence is becoming disruptive to our actual paying customers." Charles glanced around the lobby, and noticed that Margaret's raised voice was indeed drawing attention from the handful of guests seated in the elegant sitting area. A well-dressed couple near the fireplace was watching the scene unfold with obvious discomfort, though whether they were uncomfortable with Margaret's behavior or his presence was unclear. "Perhaps I should go," Charles said quietly. "No," Rachel said firmly. "You have every right to be here. You came asking for information, and we are in the business of providing information to potential guests." The simple statement hit Charles with unexpected force. Here was a woman willing to put her job on the line for a principle, for the simple idea that all people deserved basic human dignity. In his 45 years, most of them spent in the rarefied air of extreme wealth, Charles had met very few people with that kind of courage. "Miss Evans," Margaret said, her voice dangerously low, "you are overstepping your authority. I suggest you return to your other duties and allow me to handle this situation appropriately." "And I suggest," Rachel said, matching Margaret's tone, but keeping her voice professional, "that we remember our hotel's commitment to exceptional service for all potential guests." Charles realized he was witnessing something remarkable, a battle for the soul of hospitality itself, played out over a simple request for information. And watching Rachel fight that battle, seeing the way she refused to compromise her principles, even in the face of direct insubordination charges, he felt something he had not experienced in years: genuine respect for another human being. "I will take this information with me," Charles said, holding up the folder. "Thank you again, Miss Evans. Your kindness means more than you know." "You are very welcome, Mr. Murphy. I hope you will consider staying with us in the future." As Charles turned to leave, he heard Margaret's voice behind him, pitched just loud enough for him to hear. "People like him do not belong in civilized society. I do not know what has gotten into you, Rachel, but this bleeding heart nonsense stops now." Charles paused at the entrance to the hotel, looking back over his shoulder. Rachel was standing perfectly straight behind the counter, her chin raised slightly, meeting Margaret's glare with quiet defiance. In that moment, Charles Murphy knew exactly what he was going to do, and exactly who was going to help him do it. Tomorrow, he thought, things are going to change around here. The boardroom of the Grandshire Metropolitan had never been quite so silent. Charles Murphy stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than most people made in 6 months. His usually unruly hair was perfectly styled, and his green eyes held the kind of focused intensity that had built and maintained a business empire. Around the table sat the hotel's senior management team, their faces ranging from curious to concerned to, in Margaret Sterling's case, increasingly pale. She had recognized him the moment he walked into the room, and the recognition had hit her like a physical blow. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charles began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that came with absolute power. "Yesterday, I conducted what you might call an informal evaluation of our customer service protocols. I am here to share my findings." Rachel Evans sat in the back corner of the room, having been specifically requested to attend this emergency meeting despite her junior status. She looked as confused as everyone else, though Charles noticed she kept glancing at him with something that looked like dawning recognition. "Yesterday afternoon," Charles continued, "a potential guest entered our lobby requesting information about rates and availability. This guest was not dressed to our usual standards. His clothes were worn, his appearance was somewhat disheveled, and he carried an old backpack instead of designer luggage. Several managers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Hotel management was a delicate balance between maintaining exclusivity and avoiding discrimination, and they all sensed this conversation was heading somewhere dangerous. This potential guest was treated to 2 very different types of service, Charles said, his gaze moving deliberately around the room. One of our managers took a single look at this person and immediately determined that he did not belong in our establishment. She suggested he would be more comfortable at a budget motel. She questioned his ability to afford our services. She refused to provide him with basic information about our rates and packages. Margaret's face had progressed from pale to grey. She gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles were white. However, Charles continued, one of our staff members approached this same potential guest with courtesy, professionalism, and genuine concern for his comfort. She offered him water. She provided complete information about our services. She defended his right to be treated with dignity, even when challenged by her superior. Charles paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge that made several people flinch. The guest requesting information was me. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret made a small, choking sound, but no one moved to help her. Rachel's eyes went wide with shock, but Charles noticed that unlike everyone else in the room, she did not look horrified. She looked impressed. I have spent 10 years building this company on the principle that luxury service means treating every human being with dignity and respect, Charles said. Yesterday, I discovered that at least one member of our management team has forgotten this fundamental truth. He turned his attention directly to Margaret, who was now visibly shaking. Margaret Sterling, he said, his voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence C, your employment with the Grandshire Corporation is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building, and your personal effects will be sent to you. Margaret opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked around the table desperately, but no one met her eyes. Finally, she managed to whisper, "You cannot do this. I have been with this company for 20 years. You have been with this company for 20 years, Charles agreed. And yesterday you proved that you have learned nothing about what we stand for in all that time. You judged a human being by his clothes. You treated a potential guest with contempt and cruelty. Worse, you attempted to prevent another employee from doing her job properly when she tried to correct your behavior. I did not know it was you, Margaret stammered. Exactly, Charles said, his voice cutting through her attempted explanation like a blade. You did not know who I was, so you felt free to treat me with disrespect. That tells me everything I need to know about your character and your fitness for a position in hospitality. Charles gestured to the two security guards who had been waiting outside the boardroom. They entered quietly and positioned themselves behind Margaret's chair. Escort Miss Sterling from the building, Charles said. Make sure she understands that she is not welcome on any Grandshire property in the future. As Margaret was led from the room, her face a mask of shock and humiliation, Charles turned his attention to the rest of the staff, but his eyes found Rachel, who was sitting perfectly still in her chair, her face pale but her spine straight. This brings me to my second announcement, Charles said. Effective immediately, Rachel Evans is promoted to the position of General Manager of the Grandshire Metropolitan. If the first announcement had created silence, this one created an explosion of whispered conversations and shocked exclamations. Rachel herself looked as though she had been struck by lightning. Miss Evans, Charles said, speaking directly to her, yesterday you showed me what true hospitality looks like. You treated a stranger with kindness and respect, not because you knew who he was, but because that is who you are. You defended those principles even when it put your job at risk. That is exactly the kind of character I want leading this hotel. Rachel stood slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. Mr. Murphy, I do not understand. I am not qualified to be a general manager. I have never managed anything larger than the reception desk. You managed to maintain your integrity under pressure, Charles said. You managed to do the right thing when it would have been easier to do nothing. You managed to show me, in the space of 5 minutes, exactly what kind of person you are. That tells me you can manage anything. Charles walked around the table until he was standing directly in front of Rachel. The rest of the room seemed to fade away as he looked into her eyes. Miss Evans, I am offering you an opportunity to prove that character matters more than a resume. I am offering you the chance to show this entire hotel what real leadership looks like. But more than that, I'm asking you to help me build the kind of company where what happened yesterday never happens again. Rachel looked around the room at the faces staring back at her. Some looked supportive, others skeptical, a few openly hostile. But when her gaze returned to Charles, she saw something there that gave her courage, absolute confidence in her abilities. I accept, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I accept the position, and I accept the responsibility that comes with it. Charles smiled, and Rachel realized it was the first time she had seen him smile since she met him. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger and somehow more approachable. Excellent, he said. Your first management meeting is this afternoon at 2 o'clock. We have a great deal of work to do. As the room began to empty, people filing out in small groups, their voices low with excited conversation. Charles remained behind with Rachel. You look terrified, he observed. I am terrified, Rachel admitted. Yesterday I was a receptionist. Today I am supposed to be running this entire hotel. I have no idea what I'm doing. Good, Charles said. The moment you think you know everything is the moment you stop learning. The moment you stop learning is the moment you become like Margaret. Rachel shuddered at the comparison. I never want to become like that. You will not, Charles said with absolute certainty. What you did yesterday, standing up for a stranger at risk to yourself, that is not something that can be taught. That comes from who you are at your core. Everything else, budgets, staffing, operations, those are just skills, and skills can be learned. Will you teach me? Rachel asked, the question coming out before she could stop herself. Charles looked at her for a long moment, and Rachel had the strange sensation that he was seeing something in her face that she was not aware of showing. Yes, he said finally. I will teach you everything I know about running a hotel. But I suspect you are going to teach me a few things as well. As Rachel left the boardroom, her mind reeling with the magnitude of what had just happened, she could not shake the feeling that her life had just changed in ways she could not even begin to understand. Behind her, Charles Murphy watched her go, and for the first time in 10 years of running the Grancher Corporation, he found himself looking forward to coming to work. The executive office that had belonged to Margaret Sterling for 3 years now belonged to Rachel Evans, though she felt like an imposter sitting behind the massive oak desk. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the city spread out below her, and for a moment the vertigo was overwhelming. 24 hours ago, she had been taking reservation calls. Now she was supposed to be making decisions that affected the entire hotel. A soft knock on her door interrupted her spiral of self-doubt. "Come in," she called, grateful for any distraction from her churning thoughts. Charles Murphy entered carrying 2 cups of coffee and what appeared to be a stack of manila folders thick enough to serve as a weapon. He had removed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves. And somehow, this small concession to informality made him seem more approachable. "I thought you might need caffeine," he said, setting one of the cups on her desk, "and possibly a mild sedative, but coffee was easier to obtain." Despite her anxiety, Rachel found herself smiling. "Is it that obvious that I'm having a complete panic attack?" "Only to someone who has had a few panic attacks himself," Charles said, settling into one of the chairs across from her desk. "The first week I took over the company, I threw up every morning before work. By the second week, I had it down to just dry heaving. That is remarkably comforting, Rachel said, picking up her coffee and taking a grateful sip. It was perfect, just the right amount of cream and sugar, though she could not remember ever mentioning her preferences to him. "How did you know how I take my coffee?" she asked. Charles looked slightly embarrassed. "I may have asked the kitchen staff. I wanted to make sure I got it right." The simple thoughtfulness of the gesture hit Rachel unexpectedly. In her experience, powerful men did not generally concern themselves with such small details, especially not for their employees. But then again, Charles Murphy seemed to defy most of her expectations about powerful men. "These," Charles said, gesturing to the stack of folders, "are the essential files you will need to review. Financial reports, staffing schedules, vendor contracts, guest satisfaction surveys. I suggest we start with the guest surveys. They will give you a good sense of what is working and what needs improvement." Rachel opened the top folder and immediately felt overwhelmed by the columns of numbers and detailed charts. "I need to warn you," she said, "my background is in customer service, not business analytics. I can read a basic profit and loss statement, but some of this might as well be written in ancient Greek. Then we will translate it together," Charles said simply. "Pull your chair around to this side of the desk. It will be easier if we are looking at the same documents." Rachel hesitated for a moment, struck by how intimate the arrangement would be. She would be sitting close enough to smell his cologne, close enough to notice details like the small scar above his left eyebrow, or the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he concentrated. But his suggestion was purely practical, and she was being ridiculous. She moved her chair around the desk, and Charles immediately leaned forward to point at a specific section of the financial report. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, and she had to force herself to focus on the numbers instead of the way his voice changed when he was explaining something he was passionate about. "This section shows our occupancy rates by month," he was saying. "You can see that we have a significant drop during the winter months, which is typical for our market. However, last winter our decline was more severe than our competitors, which suggests we have a problem that needs addressing." Rachel studied the chart, trying to ignore the way Charles's hand brushed against hers when he reached for his pen. "Could the problem be related to customer service issues?" she asked. "If guests are having negative experiences, they are less likely to recommend us to others." Charles straightened in his chair and looked at her with something that might have been surprise. "That is an excellent observation. Most people would assume the problem was pricing or marketing, but you went straight to the guest experience." "It seems logical," Rachel said, pleased by his reaction. "People talk about their hotel experiences. If Margaret was treating guests the way she treated, well, you yesterday, word would get around." "Exactly," Charles said, his voice carrying a note of excitement. "This is exactly the kind of thinking that made me know you were right for this position. You understand that hospitality is fundamentally about human connection, not just profit margins." They spent the next 2 hours going through files, Charles explaining financial concepts, while Rachel asked questions that often revealed problems he had not considered. She had an intuitive understanding of guest psychology that came from 3 years of direct customer interaction, and Charles found himself seeing his own hotel through completely new eyes. "What about staff satisfaction?" Rachel asked, looking up from a particularly dense vendor contract. "If employees are unhappy, it shows in their interactions with guests. Have we done any surveys to see how people feel about working here?" Charles paused, his pen halfway to the paper. "No," he admitted. "We track performance metrics, but we have never formally asked employees about their job satisfaction." "That seems like something we should do," Rachel said. Especially given what happened with Margaret. If she was treating guests badly, there is a good chance she was treating staff badly too. You want to survey the entire hotel staff? Charles asked. I want to talk to them, Rachel said. Surveys can be intimidated by management. But if I sit down with small groups, informally, I think people will be more honest about their experiences. Charles found himself staring at her, struck by the simple wisdom of her approach. In his 10 years of running the company, he had become increasingly isolated from the day-to-day experiences of frontline employees. He made decisions based on reports and data, but Rachel was suggesting something radically different, actually listening to the people who did the work. That is brilliant, he said finally. Rachel blushed at the compliment. It is just common sense. You cannot fix problems you do not know about. Common sense is not as common as you might think, Charles said. I have sat through countless management presentations filled with complex strategies and expensive consulting recommendations, and none of them have been as insightful as what you just suggested. They were sitting very close together now, both leaning over the same document, and Rachel became acutely aware of the intimacy of the moment. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, casting everything in a warm, golden light, and when Charles looked up from the papers, their faces were only inches apart. For a moment, neither of them moved. Rachel felt her breath catch in her throat as she noticed the way the light brought out the green in Charles's eyes. She could see the exact moment when his gaze dropped to her lips, and she felt her heart rate accelerate in response. Rachel, Charles said softly, and her name on his lips sounded different somehow, more personal, more intimate. Yes, she whispered, not trusting her voice at full volume. Charles seemed to catch himself then, pulling back slightly and clearing his throat. I think we have covered enough for today. You should go home and get some rest. Tomorrow will be your first full day as general manager, and it will be challenging. Rachel felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. The moment had been charged with something she was not quite ready to name, and while part of her had wanted to see where it might lead, the rational part of her brain knew that complications with her new boss were the last thing she needed. You are right, she said, moving back to her side of the desk and beginning to gather the folders. I should probably spend the evening reviewing these files. Rachel, Charles said, and something in his tone made her look up. You are going to be an exceptional manager. What happened yesterday, the way you stood up for what was right, that tells me everything I need to know about your character. Trust yourself. As Rachel left the office, her arms full of files and her mind full of questions, she could not shake the feeling that something significant had happened during those 2 hours. It was not just the work they had accomplished, or the confidence Charles had shown in her abilities. It was something more subtle, more personal. It was the way he had looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, and the way her body had responded to his proximity. She was in trouble, she realized. She was attracted to her boss, the man who had just promoted her to a position she was not qualified for, the billionaire owner of the company who lived in a completely different world from hers. And based on that moment, when their faces had been inches apart, she suspected the attraction might not be entirely one-sided. As she waited for the elevator, Rachel caught her reflection in the polished doors and hardly recognized the woman looking back at her. 24 hours ago, she had been a receptionist worried about making her rent payment. Now she was the general manager of a luxury hotel and quite possibly falling for the most complicated man she had ever met. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, and as the doors closed behind her, Rachel had only one thought. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting indeed. Rachel's first crisis as general manager came at 7:30 in the morning, before she had even finished her first cup of coffee. The call came from the front desk manager, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Miss Evans, We have a situation with the Pemberton wedding. The bride's suite flooded overnight due to a broken pipe, and the wedding is scheduled for 3 o'clock this afternoon. The bride is, well, she is not taking the news well. Rachel closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had been on the job for exactly 16 hours, and already she was facing the kind of crisis that could destroy a hotel's reputation. Wedding disasters were the stuff of nightmares in the hospitality industry, the kind of stories that spread through social media like wildfire. "Where is she now?" Rachel asked, already reaching for her jacket. "The bridal suite on the 15th floor. But Miss Evans, I should warn you, she has been screaming for the past 20 minutes. She is demanding to speak to someone in charge, and she has threatened to sue us for emotional distress." Rachel felt her stomach drop, but she forced her voice to remain calm. "I will be right there. Have housekeeping assess the damage and give me a timeline for repairs. Also, get me a list of all available suites in the hotel, including the presidential suite, if it is empty." "The presidential suite is occupied by Mr. Murphy," the desk manager said hesitantly. "Then get me a list of every other available option," Rachel said. "I will handle Mr. Murphy if necessary." As Rachel rode the elevator to the 15th floor, she could hear the bride's voice echoing down the hallway. Amelia Pemberton, daughter of a prominent local businessman, had booked the Grandshire Metropolitan for what was supposed to be the social event of the season. The wedding had been featured in the society pages for months, and Rachel knew that any failure on the hotel's part would be public and devastating. She knocked gently on the door of the bridal suite and was immediately confronted by a young woman in a silk robe, her face red with tears and fury. "Are you the manager?" Amelia demanded. "Because if you are, you need to fix this disaster immediately, or I will make sure everyone in this city knows what a terrible establishment you are running." Rachel looked past Amelia into the suite and had to suppress a wince. Water damage had destroyed the hardwood floors, and the smell of mildew was already beginning to permeate the air. The bride's wedding dress, which had been hanging in the closet, was soaked through. "Miss Pemberton," Rachel said, her voice calm and professional, "I am Rachel Evans, the general manager. I am here to personally ensure that your wedding day is everything you dreamed it would be." "How can you say that?" Amelia's voice cracked with emotion. "My dress is ruined, my suite is destroyed, and my wedding is in 7 hours. This is supposed to be the most important day of my life, and you people have completely destroyed it." Rachel felt her heart go out to the young woman. Behind the anger and the threats, she could see genuine terror and heartbreak. This was not about being difficult or entitled. This was about a bride facing the potential ruin of a day she had been planning for 2 years. "Miss Pemberton," Rachel said gently, "may I come in? I would like to show you how we are going to fix this." Something in Rachel's tone seemed to penetrate Amelia's panic. She stepped aside, and Rachel entered the damaged suite, pulling out her phone as she did. "First," Rachel said, "we are going to move you to our finest available suite, which I will personally upgrade at no charge. Second, we are going to arrange for emergency dress cleaning and pressing by the city's best formal wear specialist. Third, we are going to ensure that every other aspect of your wedding is flawless." "But my dress," Amelia said, her voice breaking, "it is completely soaked. How can anyone fix that in 7 hours?" Rachel looked at the wedding dress, and she had to admit that it looked hopeless. But she had not survived 3 years in customer service by giving up at the first sign of difficulty. "Miss Pemberton, do you trust me to make some phone calls?" Rachel asked. "I cannot promise miracles, but I can promise that every resource available to this hotel will be focused on saving your wedding day." Amelia stared at her for a long moment, and Rachel could see the internal battle between hope and despair playing out on her face. "Okay," Amelia said finally. "But if you cannot fix this, I really will sue you. This wedding cost my father $50,000, and I will not let it be ruined by your hotel's incompetence." Rachel spent the next 4 hours orchestrating what could only be described as a logistical miracle. She called in favors from vendors she had worked with during her years at the front desk. She contacted the city's most exclusive dry cleaner and convinced them to make an emergency house call. She arranged for the hotel's florist to recreate the bridal suite's flower arrangements in a different room. She even tracked down a seamstress who specialized in wedding dress restoration and convinced her to work on site. But the most challenging call she had to make was to Charles Murphy. "Rachel." Charles's voice carried a note of concern when he answered his phone. "Is everything all right?" "There has been a situation," Rachel said, pacing in the hallway outside the damaged suite. "We have a wedding this afternoon, and the bridal suite flooded overnight. I need to move the bride to our best available accommodation, but our next best suite after yours is significantly smaller and not really appropriate for a wedding of this caliber." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What are you asking me, Rachel?" Rachel took a deep breath. This was her first major test as a manager, and she was about to ask the owner of the hotel to give up his own suite for a guest. It was either the right decision or a career-ending mistake. "I am asking if you would be willing to relocate for the day so that we can offer the presidential suite to the bride. I know it is an enormous favor, and I would not ask if there were any other option." Another pause. Longer this time. Rachel held her breath, wondering if she had just overstepped every boundary in the employer-employee handbook. "Of course," Charles said finally. "I will move my things to the corporate apartment downtown. The presidential suite is yours for as long as you need it." Relief flooded through Rachel so powerfully that she had to lean against the wall for support. "Thank you," she said. "I cannot tell you how much this means." "Rachel," Charles said, and something in his voice made her pay closer attention. "You are doing exactly what I hoped you would do. You are putting the guest experience above everything else, including the comfort of your boss. That is what exceptional management looks like." By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Rachel had transformed what should have been a disaster into what Amelia Pemberton would later describe as the most perfectly managed wedding in the city's social history. The bride's dress had been restored to its original glory by a team of experts working with techniques normally reserved for museum textiles. The presidential suite had been transformed into a bridal suite that surpassed the original in every way. The wedding reception had been moved to the hotel's most elegant ballroom, with upgrades that included additional floral arrangements and premium champagne service. As Rachel watched Amelia walk down the aisle in the hotel's garden courtyard, radiant in her perfectly restored dress, she felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This was what hospitality was supposed to be about: taking an impossible situation and finding a way to exceed expectations. "Quite a day," a familiar voice said behind her. Rachel turned to find Charles Murphy standing at the edge of the courtyard, dressed in a different suit than she had seen him wear before. He looked tired but impressed, and when their eyes met, she saw something there that made her heart skip a beat. "Thank you," she said simply. "For the suite, for trusting me to handle this, for everything. You handled it beautifully," Charles said, moving to stand beside her as they watched the wedding ceremony unfold. "I have been in this business for 10 years, and I have never seen anyone manage a crisis with that level of grace and creativity." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as Amelia and her new husband exchanged vows in the golden afternoon light. Rachel was acutely aware of Charles's presence beside her, the way he smelled like expensive cologne and something uniquely him, the way he seemed to radiate calm confidence even in the midst of chaos. "Rachel," Charles said softly, and when she looked up at him, she was surprised by the intensity in his eyes. What you did today, the way you handled that crisis, it was not just good management, it was leadership. It was exactly the kind of leadership this company needs. I just did what anyone would have done, Rachel said, though she knew that was not true. No, Charles said firmly. Most people would have made excuses, blamed someone else, tried to minimize the damage. You took responsibility and found solutions. You put the guests' needs above your own comfort, above your boss's comfort, above everything else. That is not what anyone would have done. That is what someone exceptional would have done. The intensity of his praise made Rachel feel slightly dizzy. She was not accustomed to being seen as exceptional by anyone, least of all by someone like Charles Murphy, but more than that, there was something in the way he was looking at her that had nothing to do with professional admiration and everything to do with something much more personal. "Charles," she began, not sure what she intended to say. "I know," he said quietly, and somehow she knew he understood exactly what she was feeling. "I know this is complicated. I know there are professional boundaries that should not be crossed. But Rachel, I cannot pretend that what I feel for you is purely professional." The words hung between them like a confession, and Rachel felt her world tilt slightly on its axis. She had suspected, hoped, feared that her attraction was not one-sided, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. "This could destroy everything," she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one could overhear them. "It could," Charles agreed. "Or it could be the beginning of something extraordinary." Before Rachel could respond, they were interrupted by Amelia Pemberton, still glowing from her wedding ceremony, approaching them with her new husband in tow. "Miss Evans," Amelia said, her voice bright with happiness, "I wanted to thank you again for saving my wedding." "What you did today was nothing short of miraculous." "It was my pleasure," Rachel said, forcing herself to focus on the bride instead of the man standing beside her whose words had just changed everything. "I hope you and your husband will be very happy." "We will be," Amelia said confidently, "and we will certainly be recommending the Grandshire Metropolitan to everyone we know. You have created customers for life." As the happy couple moved away to greet other guests, Rachel realized that Charles was watching her with something that looked very much like pride. "See?" he said softly. "Exceptional." And for the first time since her promotion, Rachel began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she really could do this job. The question was, could she do it while navigating the increasingly complicated feelings she was developing for the man who had given it to her? The Belmont restaurant was the kind of establishment where senators took their wives for anniversary dinners, and Fortune 500 executives conducted business over wine that cost more per bottle than most people made in a week. Charles had chosen it specifically because it was elegant, private, and far enough from the hotel that they were unlikely to encounter any of Rachel's new employees. What he had not anticipated was how much the setting would feel like a date. Rachel sat across from him in the candlelit booth, and Charles found himself noticing details that had nothing to do with business. The way the soft light brought out the golden highlights in her brown hair, the graceful way she held her wine glass, the small scar on her left hand that she had gotten. She had told him earlier from a kitchen accident when she was 12 years old. "So the quarterly reports show that our guest satisfaction scores have improved 15% since the Pemberton wedding," Charles said, attempting to steer the conversation back to professional matters. "Word of mouth from that event has generated 12 new bookings for major social functions." "That is wonderful," Rachel said, but Charles noticed that she seemed as distracted as he felt. "I have been thinking about expanding our wedding services. If we could create a dedicated wedding planning team, we could capitalize on this momentum." Tell me more about that idea, Charles said, genuinely interested, but also grateful to have something business-related to focus on. Rachel leaned forward slightly, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. Most hotels treat weddings as just another event, but they are so much more than that. They are the most important day in people's lives, and if we could position ourselves as wedding specialists, not just a venue, we could charge premium rates and create incredible customer loyalty. Charles found himself captivated by her passion. When Rachel talked about hospitality, her entire demeanor changed. She became animated, confident, radiant, with the kind of enthusiasm that could not be faked or taught. "What would a wedding planning team look like?" he asked. "A dedicated coordinator, obviously, but also partnerships with the best vendors in the city. Florists, photographers, musicians, cake designers, dress shops. If we could create a comprehensive service that handles every detail, brides would pay extra for the convenience and peace of mind." "That is a significant investment," Charles said, though he was already running the numbers in his head. "We would need to hire additional staff, establish vendor relationships, probably redesign some of our event spaces. The return on investment would be substantial," Rachel said confidently. "Premium weddings generate more revenue per square foot than any other type of event, and satisfied wedding clients become repeat customers for anniversaries, family celebrations, business functions." Charles realized he was staring at her again. There was something about the way Rachel approached business problems that fascinated him. She thought about hospitality holistically, seeing connections and opportunities that most managers missed. But more than that, she cared deeply about creating experiences that mattered to people, and that caring informed every decision she made. "You are brilliant," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Rachel blushed, looking down at her plate. "I just think about what I would want if I were getting married." "Are you?" Charles asked, then immediately regretted the question. Are you planning to get married? Do you have someone—" He trailed off, realizing he was making the conversation awkward. "No," Rachel said quietly. "I was engaged once, about 5 years ago, but it did not work out. He said I was too focused on my career, too independent. He wanted someone who would make him the center of her universe." "That sounds like his loss," Charles said, and meant it. Rachel looked up at him, and Charles felt something pass between them that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the growing awareness that they were a man and a woman sharing an intimate dinner, not just a boss and employee discussing hotel operations. "What about you?" Rachel asked. "Have you ever been married?" Charles shook his head. "I came close once, right after I inherited the company. She was from a family in our social circle, very appropriate, very beautiful, very interested in my bank account and not particularly interested in me." "How did you figure that out?" Charles smiled ruefully. "She told me she thought we should spend our honeymoon touring my various hotel properties so she could start planning renovations. She had already picked out new furniture for the corporate offices and was discussing how to redecorate my house. It occurred to me that she was not marrying me, she was marrying my lifestyle." "That must have been devastating," Rachel said softly. "Actually, it was liberating," Charles said. "It made me realize that most of the people in my world are attracted to what I have, not who I am. It made me very careful about relationships." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in their own thoughts. The restaurant hummed quietly around them, other couples and business associates conducting their own conversations. But Charles felt as though he and Rachel were in their own private bubble. "Charles," Rachel said finally, "what are we doing here?" The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. They both knew this dinner had stopped being about business the moment they sat down, maybe even before that. They both knew they were venturing into territory that could complicate everything they had built professionally. "I do not know," Charles admitted. "I told myself we were discussing your wedding planning proposal, but that is not entirely true, is it?" "No," Rachel said, meeting his eyes directly. "It is not." Charles reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that was undeniably personal, undeniably intimate. Rachel did not pull away, and he felt a jolt of electricity at the contact. "Rachel, I need you to know that your job is secure, regardless of what happens between us personally. I would never use my position to pressure you into anything." "I know that," Rachel said. "That is not what worries me. What does worry you?" Rachel was quiet for a long moment, staring down at their joined hands. When she looked up, her eyes were serious. "I worry that this could destroy the professional relationship we have built. I worry that other employees will think I got my promotion because of personal reasons rather than merit. I worry that if things do not work out between us romantically, I will lose the best job I have ever had." "Those are all legitimate concerns," Charles said, "and I would be lying if I said I had easy answers to them." "But," Rachel prompted, sensing there was more, "but I would also be lying if I said I could ignore what I feel for you," Charles said. "These past 2 weeks, working with you, watching you transform into an incredible manager, seeing the way you care about every detail of the guest experience, Rachel, I have never met anyone like you." Rachel felt her heart race at his words. Every rational part of her brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea, that she should thank him for dinner, go home, and pretend this conversation never happened. But a larger part of her, the part that had been increasingly aware of Charles's presence every day, the part that had been replaying their almost moment in her office dozens of times, was telling her that some opportunities were too precious to let slip away. "What would this look like?" she asked quietly. "If we decided to explore this, how would we handle it?" "Very carefully," Charles said, "very privately, at least at first. We would need to establish boundaries between our professional and personal relationships. We would need to be absolutely certain that one never compromises the other. And if it does not work out," Charles squeezed her hand gently, "then we will handle it like the adults we are. We will be professional, respectful, and we will continue to work together effectively because we both care too much about the hotel to let personal issues interfere." Rachel studied his face, looking for any sign of insincerity or manipulation. What she saw there was honesty, vulnerability, and something that looked very much like hope. "This is crazy," she said finally. "Completely crazy," Charles agreed. "We could both end up regretting this. We could. We could be making the biggest mistake of our professional lives. It is entirely possible." Rachel was quiet for another moment, weighing everything she had to lose against everything she might gain. Finally, she turned her hand palm up in his and laced their fingers together. "Okay," she said, "let us be crazy together." Charles smiled, and Rachel realized she had never seen him look quite so happy. "Just so we are clear," Charles said, "this is officially no longer a business dinner." "What is it then?" Rachel asked. Charles lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles softly, a gesture so tender and romantic that Rachel felt her breath catch. "Our first date," he said, as they sat in the candle-lit restaurant, hands intertwined across the table. Both of them knew they were crossing a line they could never uncross. The professional relationship they had built was about to become something much more complicated, much more dangerous, and much more precious. But for the first time in either of their lives, the risk felt worth taking. The first thing Rachel noticed when she arrived at the hotel the next morning was the way conversations stopped when she walked by. It was subtle, a pause in dialogue, a quick exchange of glances, the kind of momentary silence that suggested people had been talking about her. The second thing she noticed was the stack of pink message slips on her desk, all marked urgent in the receptionist's careful handwriting. The third thing she noticed, with a sinking feeling in her stomach, was the email from William Sterling, Margaret's cousin and a member of the Grandshire Corporation Board of Directors, requesting an immediate meeting to discuss personnel matters of critical importance to the hotel's operation. Rachel had been a manager for exactly 2 weeks, and she was already facing what appeared to be a coordinated challenge to her authority. She had expected some resistance to her rapid promotion, but this felt like something more serious, more organized. Her phone rang before she could begin returning the urgent calls. "Miss Evans," the voice was crisp, authoritative, and unmistakably hostile. "This is William Sterling. I believe you received my email." "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," Rachel said, forcing her voice to remain professional. "Yes, I did receive your message. When would you like to schedule our meeting?" "I am in the lobby now," William said. "I will be in your office in 5 minutes." The line went dead, and Rachel realized she was about to face her first major political challenge as a manager. William Sterling was not just any board member. He was the hotel's largest shareholder after Charles, and he had significant influence over hotel operations. If he had decided to oppose her leadership, she was in serious trouble. William Sterling entered her office without knocking, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that announced his importance to anyone within a 50-foot radius. Behind him came 2 other men Rachel recognized as board members, though she had not yet been formally introduced to them. "Miss Evans," William said, settling into a chair without being invited. "We need to discuss some concerns that have come to my attention regarding your management of this hotel." Rachel remained standing behind her desk, a tactical decision that allowed her to maintain a position of authority, even though she felt anything but authoritative. "I am listening," she said. "It has been brought to my attention that you have been making significant operational decisions without proper board oversight," William continued. "The Pemberton wedding, for example, cost this hotel thousands of dollars in emergency services, vendor premiums, and suite upgrades. You exceeded your budget authority without consulting anyone. The alternative was a public relations disaster that would have cost us significantly more," Rachel replied calmly. "The Pemberton wedding has already generated 12 new bookings worth over $200,000 in revenue." "That is not the point," William snapped. "The point is that you are a receptionist who has been given a position far beyond her qualifications, and you are making decisions that should be made by someone with actual management experience." Rachel felt a flush of anger, but forced herself to remain calm. She had known this challenge was coming. Charles had warned her that some board members would question her promotion. What she had not expected was the personal nature of the attack. "I understand your concerns," she said carefully. "Perhaps we could schedule a formal review meeting where I can present my management plan and address any specific issues you might have." "There is no need for a formal review," William said, standing up and placing a folder on her desk. "The board has already made its decision. These are the termination papers. Your employment with the Grandshire Corporation is ended, effective immediately." Rachel stared at the folder as though it contained a venomous snake. "You cannot fire me," she said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "Only Mr. Murphy has that authority." William smiled, and there was something coldly triumphant in his expression. "Mr. Murphy has delegated operational authority to the board for personnel matters below the executive level. Read your employment contract, Miss Evans. You will find that your position is subject to board approval, which has now been withdrawn." Rachel opened the folder with trembling hands and scanned the legal documents inside. The language was dense and full of corporate jargon, but the meaning was clear. The board of directors had voted to terminate her employment, and according to the terms of her management contract, they had the authority to do so. "This is about Margaret," Rachel said, the pieces suddenly falling into place. "This is revenge because I took her job." "This is about competence," William said coldly. "Margaret Sterling was a qualified, experienced manager who understood the importance of maintaining this hotel's exclusive reputation. You, on the other hand, are an idealistic child who thinks kindness is more important than profit margins." "I increased revenue by 15% in 2 weeks," Rachel said, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain calm. "And you did it by giving away services, upgrading guests for free, and spending money like it grows on trees," William replied. "That is not sustainable management, Miss Evans. That is charity work." Rachel felt the walls closing in around her. Everything she had worked for, everything she had achieved, was being taken away by men who had decided she did not deserve the opportunity she had been given. "What you are really angry about," she said, her voice quiet but clear, "is that someone like me proved that someone like Margaret was not necessary. You are angry that I succeeded without playing your political games or kissing your rings." William's face flushed red. "How dare you speak to me like that? You are a nobody, a receptionist with delusions of grandeur. You do not belong in the same room as the people who really run this company." "Get out of my office," Rachel said, her voice deadly calm. "It is not your office anymore," William replied, gesturing to his companions. "Security will escort you from the building. Your personal effects will be mailed to you." As the 3 men filed out of what had been her office, Rachel sank into her chair, staring at the termination papers spread across her desk. 2 weeks ago, she had been a receptionist with a steady job and a simple life. Today, she was unemployed, humiliated, and facing the possibility that everything she had believed about merit and fairness was just naive idealism. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Charles. "Board meeting called for emergency session. Something is wrong. Are you okay?" Rachel stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "I have been fired. William Sterling terminated my employment this morning." Her phone rang immediately. "Rachel, where are you?" Charles's voice was tight with controlled fury. "My office, former office," she corrected. "They are sending security to escort me out." "Do not move," Charles said. "Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. Do not leave the building. I am on my way." The line went dead, and Rachel sat in the sudden silence of her former office, surrounded by the work she'd been doing to improve the hotel, holding termination papers that reduced her 2 weeks of accomplishment to a footnote in someone else's story. For the first time since Charles had offered her the promotion, Rachel wondered if Margaret Sterling might have been right about one thing. Maybe some people really did not belong in certain worlds, no matter how hard they worked or how much they achieved. But even as the thought crossed her mind, Rachel felt a surge of anger that burned away her self-doubt. She had not failed as a manager. She had succeeded brilliantly, and the only reason she was being fired was because her success threatened people who had never had to earn their positions. If William Sterling wanted a fight, she decided he was going to get one. Charles Murphy burst through the office door with the kind of controlled fury that made seasoned business executives step aside in corporate hallways. His usually immaculate appearance showed signs of haste. His tie was slightly askew, and his hair looked as though he'd been running his fingers through it during the elevator ride to the 15th floor. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" he demanded, his voice carrying the kind of authority that could silence an entire boardroom. William Sterling, who had been instructing security guards on the proper procedure for escorting terminated employees from the building, turned with a smile that managed to be both smug and deferential. "Charles, excellent timing. We were just handling a personnel matter that required immediate attention." Miss Evans's employment has been terminated due to gross incompetence and insubordination. Charles looked past William to where Rachel sat behind her desk, still holding the termination papers. Her face was pale but composed, and when their eyes met, he saw something there that made his chest tighten with both admiration and protective fury. "By whose authority?" Charles asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "By board authority," William replied, producing a folder of his own. "As you well know, personnel decisions for management positions below the executive level fall under board jurisdiction according to the corporate bylaws you yourself approved." Charles accepted the folder and scanned the documents inside, his expression growing darker with each paragraph. The legal language was technically correct, but the spirit of what was happening was a blatant abuse of power. "This is a coup," he said finally, looking up at William with undisguised contempt. "You are using a technicality to overturn my management decision because you disagree with my choice of personnel." "We are correcting a mistake," William said smoothly. "Miss Evans was promoted far beyond her qualifications, and her brief tenure has already demonstrated that our concerns were justified." "Her brief tenure," Charles said, his voice rising slightly, "increased guest satisfaction scores by 15%, generated over $200,000 in new revenue, and prevented what could have been the worst public relations disaster in this hotel's history. No, she also exceeded budget authority, made unauthorized operational changes, and showed complete disregard for proper management protocols," William countered. "Charles, I understand that you feel personally invested in this decision, but you cannot allow sentiment to cloud your business judgment." The words were carefully chosen, and Charles caught the implication immediately. William was suggesting that his defense of Rachel was based on personal rather than professional considerations, which was both accurate and dangerous. "My business judgment," Charles said, "is that Rachel Evans is the best manager this hotel has had in years. Your business judgment, apparently, is that qualified managers can be fired for political reasons." "She is not qualified," William said firmly. "She is a receptionist with 2 weeks of management experience. The fact that you cannot see the problem with that situation suggests that perhaps your judgment has been compromised." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and Charles realized that this confrontation was about much more than Rachel's employment. William was testing his authority as CEO, using Rachel as a pawn in a larger power struggle. "Rachel," Charles said, turning his attention to her for the first time since entering the office, "would you mind giving us a moment alone?" Rachel stood slowly, gathering her dignity around her like armor. "Of course, Mr. Murphy. I will be in the lobby if you need me." As she walked past the group of men, Charles noticed the way she held her head high despite the humiliation she had just endured. She paused beside him, and for just a moment, her professional composure slipped. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words meant for him alone. After Rachel left, Charles closed the office door and turned to face William and his 2 board member allies. The atmosphere in the room shifted immediately, becoming charged with the kind of tension that preceded corporate warfare. "Gentlemen," Charles said, his voice carrying the kind of cold authority that had built his business empire, "I am going to say this once, and I suggest you listen carefully. Rachel Evans will be reinstated as general manager of this hotel immediately, or you will all be looking for new positions on other company boards." William's smile widened. "I am afraid it is not that simple, Charles. The board vote was unanimous among present members. To overturn it, you would need to call an emergency board meeting and achieve a majority vote. Given that you control exactly 51% of the voting shares, and I control 25%, You would need the support of at least some of the remaining board members. And you think you can prevent that? I think, William said carefully, that the other board members are concerned about the precedent of promoting unqualified employees to senior positions based on personal relationships. There have been rumors, Charles, about your interactions with Miss Evans, romantic rumors. Charles felt the blood drain from his face. What are you implying? I am not implying anything. I am stating directly that several hotel employees have reported seeing you and Miss Evans in what appeared to be intimate situations. Dinner at the Belmont restaurant, for example, where you were observed holding hands and behaving like a couple rather than business associates. The words hit Charles like a physical blow. He had been so careful to keep his growing feelings for Rachel separate from their professional relationship, but apparently not careful enough. In the hospitality industry, gossip traveled faster than room service, and the suggestion of an inappropriate relationship between a CEO and a recently promoted employee was exactly the kind of scandal that could destroy reputations. My personal life is not subject to board oversight, Charles said, though he knew the argument was weak. Your personal life becomes subject to board oversight when it affects your business judgment, William replied. The appearance of promoting an employee based on romantic interest rather than merit creates liability for the company. It suggests favoritism, possible sexual harassment, and gross misuse of corporate power. That is ridiculous, Charles said. But even as he spoke, he realized how the situation must look to outsiders. A billionaire CEO promotes a receptionist to a senior management position, then begins a romantic relationship with her. The optics were terrible, regardless of the actual timeline or motivations. Is it ridiculous? William asked. Or is it exactly what happened? You met an attractive young woman, became infatuated, promoted her far beyond her qualifications, and are now willing to risk your own reputation to protect her. Charles wanted to deny the accusation, but the truth was more complicated. Yes, he was attracted to Rachel. Yes, their relationship had evolved beyond purely professional boundaries, but his decision to promote her had been based entirely on her character and capabilities, not on romantic interest. The promotion was based on merit, he said firmly. Prove it, William challenged. Call an emergency board meeting. Present Miss Evans's qualifications to the full board. Let them vote on her reinstatement based on her professional credentials rather than your personal feelings. It was a trap, and Charles knew it. An emergency board meeting would force him to defend Rachel's qualifications in front of people who had already decided she was unworthy of the position. Worse, it would make their relationship public knowledge, subjecting both of them to scrutiny and gossip that could destroy their careers. Fine, Charles said after a long pause. I will call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow afternoon. But understand this, William, if you think you can use corporate politics to overturn my management decisions, you are about to learn exactly how much power a 51% shareholder actually has. William's smile never wavered. I look forward to the meeting, Charles. I think you're going to find that even 51% is not enough when your judgment has been compromised by personal involvement. After the board members left, Charles stood alone in Rachel's former office, surrounded by the work she had been doing to improve the hotel. Her computer was still logged in, showing spreadsheets and reports that demonstrated her growing mastery of hotel operations. Her coffee cup sat on the desk, still half full, beside a notepad covered with her neat handwriting, outlining ideas for improving guest services. The evidence of her competence was everywhere. But Charles realized that competence might not be enough to save her job. In the corporate world, perception often mattered more than reality, and the perception that she had been promoted for personal reasons could destroy everything they had both worked to build. His phone buzzed with a text message from Rachel. "I am in the lobby coffee shop. Take your time." Charles looked around the office one more time, then made a decision that would either save Rachel's career or destroy his own. Rachel sat in the hotel's lobby coffee shop, staring at a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. The elegant space, with its marble columns and crystal chandeliers, had always made her feel sophisticated and important when she was working at the reception desk. Now it felt like a beautiful prison where she was waiting for her professional execution to be carried out. The other hotel employees kept glancing in her direction when they thought she was not looking. Word of her termination had spread through the staff with the speed of gossip in a small town, and she could practically feel their whispered conversations. "Did you hear about Rachel? I always said she was promoted too fast." Charles Murphy must be furious. When Charles finally appeared in the coffee shop entrance, Rachel could tell immediately that the conversation with William Sterling had not gone well. His usual composed demeanor was slightly frayed around the edges, and there was a tightness around his eyes that suggested barely controlled anger. He slid into the chair across from her without saying anything, and for a moment they sat in silence while he seemed to gather his thoughts. "How bad is it?" Rachel asked finally. "Bad," Charles admitted. "William has orchestrated this very carefully. He has the votes to sustain your termination unless I can convince at least 2 other board members to change their minds." "And what are the chances of that?" Charles met her eyes directly. "Honestly, not good. William has been spreading rumors about our relationship. He is suggesting that your promotion was based on personal rather than professional considerations." Rachel felt her stomach drop. "What kind of rumors?" "That we have been romantically involved. That I promoted you because I was attracted to you, not because you were qualified for the position." The words hit Rachel like a slap. She had known this was a risk when they decided to explore their attraction to each other, but she had not anticipated how quickly and completely it could be weaponized against them. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she said quietly. "Every success I achieve will be attributed to your favoritism. Every decision I make will be questioned because people think I'm sleeping my way to the top." "Rachel, you earned that promotion," Charles said firmly. "Your performance over the past 2 weeks has proven that beyond any doubt." "Has it?" Rachel asked, her voice bitter. "Or have I just been playing dress-up in a job that was never really mine? Maybe William is right. Maybe I am just a receptionist with delusions of grandeur." Charles reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that felt both comforting and dangerous, given their current circumstances. "Do not let them do this to you," he said. "Do not let them convince you that you are not worthy of the success you have earned. What William is doing is not about your qualifications. It is about power and politics, and his inability to accept that someone like you can be better at this job than someone like Margaret." Rachel looked down at their joined hands, acutely aware that anyone in the coffee shop could see them and draw their own conclusions. "Charles, maybe we should stop this. Maybe I should just take the termination and find another job. If we continue to fight this, it will destroy both of our reputations." "Is that what you want?" Charles asked. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. The safe choice would be to walk away, to accept that some battles could not be won and some dreams were too expensive to pursue. But as she looked around the lobby, seeing the hotel she had come to love, thinking about the staff who had started to trust her leadership and the guests whose experiences she had been working to improve, she realized that walking away was not really an option. "No," she said finally, "I want to fight. I want to prove that I deserve this job, not because of who I know, but because of what I can do." Charles smiled. And Rachel realized it was the first genuine smile she had seen from him since this crisis began. "Good," he said, "because I have a plan. It is risky, and it might backfire spectacularly, but if it works, it will not only save your job, but also prove to the board that you are exactly the kind of manager this company needs." "What kind of plan?" Charles glanced around the coffee shop, then leaned forward and lowered his voice. "I'm going to give you the chance to prove yourself in front of the entire board. Tomorrow afternoon, when they meet to discuss your termination, you are going to present a comprehensive management plan for the hotel. You are going to show them projections, strategies, and innovations that demonstrate not just your competence, but your vision for the future. Charles, I have been on the job for 2 weeks. I do not have enough experience to present a comprehensive management plan to a hostile board." "Then we will develop one together," Charles said. "Tonight, we will work through the night if necessary, analyzing every aspect of the hotel's operations, identifying opportunities for improvement, creating a presentation that will make it impossible for them to deny your qualifications." Rachel stared at him, amazed by his faith in her abilities and terrified by the magnitude of what he was proposing. "And if I fail, if the presentation is not good enough to convince them, then we will both go down fighting," Charles said simply. "But Rachel, I do not think you are going to fail. I have watched you work for 2 weeks, and I have seen you handle challenges that would defeat most experienced managers. You have something that cannot be taught or learned from a textbook, the ability to see what guests really need, and the courage to do whatever it takes to provide it." They spent the rest of the afternoon in Charles's corporate apartment, a luxurious space on the top floor of a downtown high-rise that Rachel had never seen before. The apartment was elegant but impersonal, all expensive furniture and artwork that spoke of money but not of the man who lived there. "You do not spend much time here, do you?" Rachel observed as they spread financial reports and operational data across the dining room table. "Not really," Charles admitted. "I usually stay at the hotel when I am in the city. This place was decorated by a professional designer who was told to create something impressive for entertaining. It has never felt like home." As they worked through the evening, poring over spreadsheets and guest satisfaction surveys, Rachel began to see the hotel business through Charles's eyes. The numbers told stories about guest preferences, seasonal patterns, and operational inefficiencies that she had never noticed from her position at the reception desk. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a section of the guest satisfaction data. "Our scores for housekeeping are consistently lower on Mondays and Tuesdays. That suggests that weekend coverage is inadequate, probably because we use part-time staff who are not as well trained." Charles looked at the data she was highlighting and nodded slowly. "I never noticed that pattern. How would you address it?" "Cross-training," Rachel said without hesitation. "Our full-time housekeeping staff could work rotating weekend shifts, ensuring that service quality remains consistent throughout the week. Yes, it would mean paying overtime rates, but the improvement in guest satisfaction would be worth the additional cost." They worked until nearly midnight, developing strategies for everything from revenue optimization to staff training programs. Charles found himself continually impressed by Rachel's insights, her ability to see connections between different aspects of hotel operations that he had missed despite his years of experience. "You realize," he said, as they finally began to organize their notes into a coherent presentation, "that what you have developed tonight is better than most consulting reports I have paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for." "I have an advantage," Rachel said. "I know this hotel from the ground up. I have worked every shift, dealt with every type of guest problem, seen how our systems work and how they fail. Most consultants see hotels as abstract business models. I see this hotel as a living thing with its own personality and needs." As the clock struck midnight, they found themselves sitting close together on Charles's sofa, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups, both exhausted but energized by what they had accomplished. "Rachel," Charles said quietly, "whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that working with you tonight has been one of the most intellectually satisfying experiences of my professional life." "For me too," Rachel said, suddenly aware of how intimate their situation had become. They were alone in his apartment, working side by side, their shared passion for the hotel creating a connection that felt deeper than mere professional collaboration. "This is dangerous," she said softly, though she made no move to create distance between them. "What is dangerous?" Charles asked, though his eyes suggested he knew exactly what she meant. "This, us, being alone together, feeling like we are partners in something bigger than just business." Charles reached up and touched her face gently, his thumb tracing along her cheekbone. "Rachel, I know the timing is terrible. I know we are in the middle of fighting for your career. But I need you to know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with our professional relationship and everything to do with who you are as a person." Rachel leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment. When she opened them, Charles could see the internal battle she was fighting between what she wanted and what she thought was wise. "Charles, if we do this, if we cross this line tonight, there is no going back. Tomorrow, when I am standing in front of that board trying to prove I am qualified for my job, they will be looking for any sign that my relationship with you is influencing my career." "I know," Charles said, "and if you want to wait, if you want to keep our relationship purely professional until this crisis is resolved, I will understand." Rachel studied his face, seeing the sincerity there, the willingness to put her needs above his own desires. It was exactly that quality, his ability to put her success before his own comfort, that made her realize how completely she had fallen for him. "I do not want to wait," she said quietly. Charles smiled, and this time there was nothing uncertain or conflicted about his expression. "Neither do I." When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, tentative, as though he was giving her time to change her mind. But when Rachel responded, her arms sliding around his neck, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of weeks of suppressed attraction and growing emotional intimacy. "Are you sure about this?" Charles whispered against her lips. "I am sure about you," Rachel replied. "Everything else we will figure out as we go." They made love slowly, carefully, with the kind of tenderness that came from genuine caring rather than mere physical attraction. Afterward, as they lay together in Charles's bed, Rachel traced patterns on his chest and wondered how her life had become so complicated and so perfect at the same time. "What are you thinking?" Charles asked softly. "I am thinking," Rachel said, "that tomorrow I'm going to walk into that boardroom and fight for my job. And I am thinking that regardless of what happens, tonight was worth every risk we are taking." Charles pulled her closer, and as they drifted off to sleep together, both of them knew that whatever the board decided tomorrow, their relationship had crossed a threshold that would change everything about their future. The Grandshire Corporation boardroom was designed to intimidate. The mahogany table could seat 20 people comfortably. The oil paintings on the walls depicted stern-faced men who had built business empires in previous centuries, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city that reminded everyone present exactly how much power was concentrated in this room. Rachel stood at the head of the table, her laptop connected to the presentation screen, facing 8 board members who ranged from openly hostile to politely skeptical. She had chosen her most conservative navy blue suit and pulled her hair back in a severe bun, trying to project an image of competence and professionalism that would counteract any suggestions of inappropriate favoritism. Charles sat at his customary place to her right, his expression carefully neutral. They had agreed that he would not speak during her presentation unless directly asked a question, both to avoid any appearance of coaching and to force the board to evaluate her on her own merits. William Sterling sat directly across from Rachel, his face wearing the kind of smile that suggested he was about to enjoy watching her fail publicly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rachel began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present my vision for the future of the Grandshire Metropolitan. I know there have been questions about my qualifications for this position, and I welcome the chance to address those concerns directly." She clicked to her first slide, which showed the hotel's guest satisfaction scores over the past 5 years. "When I was promoted to general manager 2 weeks ago, this hotel was facing several significant challenges. Guest satisfaction had been declining steadily. Our competitive position in the luxury market was weakening, and staff turnover was above industry averages." William Sterling interrupted before she could continue. "Miss Evans, these problems developed over several years under experienced management. What makes you think someone with your limited background can solve them?" Rachel had expected this question and was ready for it. "Because I have spent 3 years working directly with guests and staff, experiencing these problems firsthand. I have seen how our systems fail and how they succeed. I understand the disconnect between our executive strategy and our operational reality." She clicked to the next slide, which showed detailed operational data that she and Charles had analyzed the night before. For example, our housekeeping satisfaction scores drop significantly on weekends when we rely on part-time staff. Our guest complaints spike during shift changes when communication between departments breaks down. Our repeat customer rate is lowest among guests who stay during our busiest periods when our staff is most stressed. "Anyone can identify problems," another board member said dismissively. "What solutions are you proposing?" Rachel spent the next 20 minutes walking through her comprehensive improvement plan, addressing everything from staff training protocols to revenue optimization strategies. She presented financial projections showing how her proposed changes would increase profitability while improving guest satisfaction. She outlined implementation timelines and measurement criteria that demonstrated her understanding of both strategic planning and operational execution. But the moment that changed everything came when she addressed the elephant in the room directly. "I know some of you believe I was promoted because of personal favoritism rather than professional merit," she said, looking directly at William Sterling. "I understand why the timeline of my promotion might create that perception, but I would like to present evidence that suggests otherwise." She clicked to a slide showing detailed performance metrics from her 3 years as a receptionist. "These numbers show that I consistently outperformed other front desk staff in guest satisfaction ratings, problem resolution, and upselling revenue generation. My personnel file contains 12 commendations from guests who specifically requested that their positive feedback be shared with management." She moved to the next slide, which showed the results of her first 2 weeks as manager. "Since my promotion, guest satisfaction scores have increased 15%, revenue has increased 12%, and we have booked over $200,000 in new business directly attributable to improved service quality. These results are not accidental, and they are not because I am lucky. They are because I understand what this hotel needs to succeed." The room was silent as board members studied the data she had presented. Rachel could see some of them beginning to look uncertain about their predetermined opposition to her leadership. "Furthermore," Rachel continued, I would like to address the suggestion that my personal relationship with Mr. Murphy has influenced my professional advancement. Charles tensed slightly in his chair, but Rachel had insisted on addressing this issue directly rather than pretending it did not exist. Mr. Murphy and I have developed a personal relationship, she said simply. We have been honest about that fact, and we have been careful to maintain appropriate professional boundaries. However, I want to be absolutely clear about the timeline. Our personal relationship began after my promotion, not before. The decision to promote me was based entirely on my professional performance and potential. William Sterling leaned forward in his chair. That is a convenient claim, Miss Evans, but how can we verify the timeline? Because, Rachel said, clicking to her final slide, I can provide documented evidence of every interaction Mr. Murphy and I had prior to my promotion. Security camera footage, email records, personnel files, witness statements from other employees. The record will show that before the day he offered me this position, we had exactly 4 conversations, all of them brief and entirely professional. The slide showed a detailed timeline of her interactions with Charles, including dates, times, and witnesses. It was thorough, comprehensive, and completely exonerating. The suggestion that I was promoted for personal reasons is not just false, Rachel continued. It is insulting to both of us. It suggests that Mr. Murphy would risk his company's success for personal gratification, and it suggests that I would accept a position I had not earned. Neither of those things is true. She closed her laptop and looked around the table at the 8 board members who would decide her fate. I'm not asking you to ignore my lack of traditional management experience. I'm asking you to consider whether traditional experience is what this hotel needs. I'm asking you to evaluate me based on my results, my vision, and my commitment to excellence. And I'm asking you to decide whether you want a manager who plays political games and maintains the status quo, or a manager who fights for every guest, every employee, and every opportunity to exceed expectations. The silence that followed was profound. Rachel had laid everything on the table: her competence, her integrity, her vision for the hotel's future. There was nothing more she could say, nothing more she could prove. Thank you, Miss Evans, the board chairman said finally. If you would please wait outside while we deliberate. As Rachel gathered her materials and left the boardroom, Charles caught her eye and gave her an almost imperceptible nod of approval. Whatever the board decided, she had represented herself with dignity and professionalism that left no doubt about her qualifications. In the hallway outside the boardroom, Rachel sat in an elegant chair that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and tried not to think about what would happen if the board voted to sustain her termination. She had given everything she had to that presentation, and if it was not enough to save her job, she was not sure what her next step would be. 20 minutes later, the boardroom door opened and Charles emerged alone. His expression was carefully neutral, giving Rachel no indication of the outcome. "They want to see you again," he said simply. Rachel walked back into the boardroom on unsteady legs, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. "Miss Evans," the board chairman said, "we have reached a decision. By a vote of 6-2, the board has decided to reinstate you as general manager of the Grand Shire Metropolitan, effective immediately." Rachel felt her knees go weak with relief. She had won. Against all odds, despite all the political maneuvering and personal attacks, she had proven herself worthy of the position. "However," William Sterling said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, "this decision comes with conditions. Your performance will be reviewed monthly by the full board. Any decline in hotel metrics will result in immediate termination, and your personal relationship with Mr. Murphy will be subject to ongoing scrutiny to ensure it does not affect your professional judgment. I understand, Rachel said, though the conditions felt more like threats than reasonable oversight. Congratulations, Miss Evans, the board chairman said. We look forward to seeing your continued success. As the board members filed out of the room, William Sterling paused beside Rachel's chair. This is not over, he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. You may have won this battle, but you have made an enemy who has a very long memory. After he left, Rachel and Charles were alone in the boardroom. For a moment, neither of them spoke, both overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. You were magnificent, Charles said finally. That presentation was better than anything I could have done. We did it, Rachel said, still hardly believing it was true. We actually did it. Charles walked around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as the stress and fear of the past 24 hours finally began to fade. No, he said softly. You did it. You saved your own job, Rachel. You proved that you belong here not because of who you know, but because of who you are. As they stood together in the boardroom where Rachel had just fought the battle of her professional life, both of them knew that their relationship had been tested in the most public and challenging way possible. They had survived the scrutiny, overcome the opposition, and emerged stronger than before. But William Sterling's parting words echoed in Rachel's mind. This was not over. She had won the battle, but the war for her professional survival was just beginning. 3 weeks after her reinstatement, Rachel was working in her office when her assistant knocked on the door with an expression that immediately put her on alert. Miss Evans, there is someone here to see you. She says it is urgent, and she specifically asked not to be announced to Mr. Murphy. The woman who entered Rachel's office was in her 70s, elegantly dressed in the kind of understated luxury that spoke of old money rather than new wealth. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her posture regal, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone accustomed to evaluating people quickly and accurately. Miss Evans, the woman said, settling into the chair across from Rachel's desk without being invited. I am Catherine Whitmore, chairwoman of the Whitmore Foundation and a longtime friend of the Murphy family. I believe we need to have a conversation. Rachel felt her stomach tighten with apprehension. The Whitmore Foundation was one of the most influential charitable organizations in the city, and Catherine Whitmore was a social powerhouse whose opinion could make or break reputations in the upper echelons of society. Of course, Mrs. Whitmore, how can I help you? You can help me by being honest about your relationship with Charles Murphy and what you hope to gain from it. The directness of the question caught Rachel off guard. She had been expecting criticism of her management style or questions about her qualifications, not a personal interrogation about her romantic life. I am not sure I understand what you are asking, Rachel said carefully. Catherine smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Miss Evans, I have known Charles since he was a child. His parents were dear friends of mine, and I have watched him build his business empire while remaining isolated from the kind of social connections that would be beneficial to a man in his position. I still do not understand how this concerns me. It concerns you because you have managed to accomplish what dozens of more appropriate women have failed to do. You have captured Charles's attention and apparently his affection. What I need to understand is whether you are genuinely interested in him or whether you are a very clever opportunist who has recognized the value of his attraction to you. Rachel felt her temper beginning to rise, but she forced herself to remain calm. Mrs. Whitmore, my personal relationship with Mr. Murphy is exactly that, personal. I do not see how it is any of your business. It becomes my business, Catherine said, her voice turning cold. When it affects Charles's reputation and social standing, you are a receptionist, Miss Evans. Regardless of your recent promotion, you come from a completely different world than Charles. You have no understanding of the social obligations and expectations that come with his position. Are you suggesting that I am not good enough for him? I am not suggesting it, dear. I am stating it directly. Charles needs a partner who can move in his social circles, who understands the philanthropic and cultural responsibilities of wealth, who can represent the Murphy name with appropriate dignity. You, I am afraid, are not that person. Rachel stared at Catherine Whitmore, amazed by the woman's audacity and stung by the casual cruelty of her assessment. This was exactly what she had feared when she first realized her feelings for Charles, that his world would never accept someone like her, regardless of her personal qualities or professional achievements. "What do you want from me?" Rachel asked quietly. "I want you to end this relationship before it damages Charles's reputation and your own career prospects. I understand that you have feelings for him, but surely you can see that this romance has no future. Charles will eventually realize that he needs someone more suitable, and when that happens, you will be left with nothing but the humiliation of having reached beyond your station." "And if I refuse?" Catherine's smile returned, colder than before. "Then you will discover exactly how difficult life can become for someone who lacks the social connections necessary to protect herself. Board positions, charitable appointments, business partnerships, even employment opportunities, they all depend on reputation and social standing. I would hate to see your promising career derailed because you made the mistake of believing that love conquers all." The threat was delivered with such polite elegance that it took Rachel a moment to fully process what she was hearing. Catherine Whitmore was offering her a choice: end her relationship with Charles voluntarily, or face systematic social and professional destruction. "Mrs. Whitmore," Rachel said, her voice steady despite the anger coursing through her, "I think you should leave now." "Of course, dear. But do think about what I have said. Charles is a wonderful man who deserves a partner who can truly support his position in society. You seem like a nice girl, but sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone we care about is to step aside and let them find happiness with someone more appropriate." After Catherine left, Rachel sat alone in her office, staring out the window at the city below. The conversation had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, not because of the threats, but because of the kernel of truth in Catherine's words. She was from a different world than Charles. She did not understand the social expectations and obligations that came with his wealth and position. She had no experience with charity galas and country club politics, and the kind of sophisticated social dynamics that were second nature to people born into privilege. Her phone buzzed with a text from Charles. "Dinner tonight. I have something I want to discuss with you." Rachel stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Of course. Your place or mine?" "Mine, 8 o'clock, and Rachel, I love you." The words on the screen made her heart race and her stomach sink at the same time. Charles loved her. He had never said it before, though she had sensed his feelings growing deeper over the past few weeks, and she loved him too, completely and desperately and probably foolishly. But Catherine Whitmore's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone we care about is to step aside and let them find happiness with someone more appropriate. As Rachel tried to focus on the financial reports spread across her desk, she could not shake the feeling that her happiness was about to collide with reality in the most devastating way possible. Charles's corporate apartment had been transformed since the last time Rachel visited. The impersonal designer furniture had been supplemented with personal touches that made the space feel like a home rather than a showplace. Books scattered on the coffee table, family photographs on the mantel, a throw blanket draped over the sofa that looked soft and inviting rather than decorative. You have been redecorating, Rachel observed as Charles poured wine for both of them. I realized that I have been living like a guest in my own life, Charles said, handing her a glass of the excellent Bordeaux he had been saving for a special occasion. I decided it was time to create a space that actually reflected who I am rather than what I thought people expected to see. They settled on the sofa together, and Rachel noticed that Charles seemed nervous about something. He kept glancing at her with an expression she could not quite read, and his usual confidence appeared to be slightly shaken. "What did you want to discuss?" she asked gently. Charles took a sip of wine, then set his glass on the coffee table and turned to face her fully. "Rachel, these past few weeks, working with you, fighting for your job, building something together both professionally and personally. It has been the most meaningful time of my adult life." "For me too," Rachel said, though Catherine Whitmore's words were echoing in the back of her mind. "I know our relationship is complicated," Charles continued. "I know there are challenges with the professional aspects, the social differences, the public scrutiny. But I also know that what we have together is rare and precious and worth fighting for." Rachel felt her heart beginning to race as she realized where this conversation was heading. "Charles, let me finish," he said gently. "I love you, Rachel. I love your kindness, your intelligence, your courage, your integrity. I love the way you see the world and the way you make me want to be a better person. I love that you challenge me and support me and make me laugh even in the middle of a crisis." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box that made Rachel's breath catch in her throat. "I love you enough to want to spend the rest of my life with you," Charles said, opening the box to reveal a ring that was both elegant and understated. Exactly the kind of thing she would have chosen for herself if she had dared to dream so high. "Charles, please," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rachel Marie Evans," Charles said, sliding off the sofa to kneel in front of her. "Will you marry me?" The question hung in the air between them, beautiful and impossible and heartbreaking. Rachel looked at the ring, looked at Charles's hopeful face, looked at the life he was offering her, and felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. "I cannot," she said, the words feeling like they were being torn from her chest. Charles' expression shifted from hope to confusion to something that looked like devastation. "What do you mean you cannot?" "Rachel, I thought we both felt the same way about this." "We do," Rachel said, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Charles, I love you more than I ever thought possible. But that is exactly why I cannot marry you." "That does not make any sense." Rachel stood up and walked to the window, needing distance between them to say what she had to say. "Today, I had a visit from Catherine Whitmore," she began, and saw Charles stiffen at the mention of the name. "She explained to me very clearly what my relationship with you means for your reputation and social standing. Catherine Whitmore is a meddling old woman who has no right to interfere in our personal lives," Charles said, his voice tight with anger. "Maybe not," Rachel said, "but she is also right about some things. I am not from your world, Charles. I do not know how to navigate the social expectations that come with your position. I cannot be the kind of partner you need for business relationships and charitable obligations and all the other responsibilities that come with your wealth." "I do not care about any of that," Charles said, standing and moving toward her. "Rachel, the social obligations and expectations are just games that people play. What matters is what we have together." "But it does matter," Rachel said, turning to face him with tears still flowing down her cheeks. "Your reputation affects your business. Your business affects hundreds of employees and thousands of customers. If our relationship damages your standing in the community, it hurts more than just us. So you are going to sacrifice our happiness because Catherine Whitmore thinks you are not good enough for me? I am going to sacrifice our happiness because I love you enough to want what is best for you, even if it is not me." Charles stared at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. "This is not what is best for me," he said finally. "Rachel, you are what is best for me. You make me happy in a way I never thought possible. You challenge me to be better. You support me when I am struggling. You share my vision for what we can accomplish together. How can giving that up be what is best for anyone? Because you deserve someone who can be a true partner in every aspect of your life," Rachel said. "Someone who can host charity events and charm business associates and represent the Murphy name with the kind of sophistication that comes naturally to people born into that world." "I can hire people to host charity events," Charles said desperately. "I can charm my own business associates. I do not need a wife who is a social accessory. I need a wife who is my partner, my equal, my best friend. I need you." Rachel felt her resolve wavering as she looked at the pain in his eyes. Every instinct she had was telling her to say yes, to take the ring, to trust that love would be enough to overcome the obstacles they would face. But Catherine Whitmore's words kept echoing in her mind, and Rachel realized that her own fears about not belonging in Charles's world were being confirmed by someone who understood that world better than she ever would. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I cannot do this to you. I cannot be the reason your life becomes more complicated and difficult." Charles looked at her for a long moment, and Rachel could see the exact instant when he realized she was not going to change her mind. "This is not about me," he said quietly. "This is about you being afraid. You are letting fear convince you that you are not worthy of happiness." "Maybe I am," Rachel admitted. "But maybe that is better than letting love convince me to ignore reality." Charles closed the ring box with a soft snap that sounded like a door closing on their future. "If that is really how you feel," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "then I will not try to change your mind. But Rachel, I want you to know that you are making the biggest mistake of both our lives." Rachel nodded, unable to trust her voice to remain steady. "I should go," she said finally. "Yes," Charles agreed. "I think you should." As Rachel left Charles' apartment for the last time, she felt as though she was leaving her heart behind. She had just refused a marriage proposal from the man she loved, and she was not sure she would ever forgive herself for choosing fear over faith. But as she drove home through the city streets, she told herself that she had done the right thing. She had saved Charles from making a mistake that would have complicated his life and damaged his reputation. She had chosen his happiness over her own, which was what real love demanded. The only problem was that it felt exactly like dying. The Monday morning staff meeting was the first time Rachel and Charles had been in the same room since her rejection of his proposal 3 days earlier. They sat at opposite ends of the conference table, both maintaining perfect professional composure while carefully avoiding direct eye contact. The other department heads seemed to sense the tension, but were too professional to comment on it directly. Instead, they focused on their reports and presentations with unusual intensity, as though concentrating very hard on business matters could somehow dispel the obvious awkwardness in the room. Guest satisfaction scores continue to improve, the guest services manager reported. "We received 23 specific commendations last week, 15 of which mentioned exceptional service from our management team." Rachel forced herself to smile and nod appropriately, but she could feel Charles's presence at the other end of the table like a physical weight. Every time she glanced in his direction, she was struck by how carefully neutral his expression was, how completely he had locked away whatever personal feelings might be affecting him. "Revenue projections for next quarter look very strong," The financial controller continued. The wedding bookings generated by the Pemberton event are exceeding our most optimistic estimates. That is excellent news, Rachel managed to say. Has our expanded wedding services team been able to handle the increased demand? Actually, that brings up an important point, Charles said, speaking directly to her for the first time since the meeting began. We need to discuss the long-term strategy for the wedding services expansion. The current growth rate suggests we will need additional staff and possibly dedicated event spaces. Rachel felt her heart rate accelerate at the sound of his voice, but she forced herself to respond professionally. I agree. I have been working on a comprehensive expansion plan that addresses staffing, space allocation, and vendor partnerships. I can have a detailed proposal ready for review by the end of the week. Good, Charles said, his tone completely businesslike. Please include budget projections and implementation timelines. We will need board approval for any significant capital expenditures. The mention of the board sent a subtle tension through the room. Everyone present knew about Rachel's recent battle with William Sterling and the ongoing scrutiny of her management decisions. Speaking of board oversight, the hotel operations manager said carefully, there have been some questions about our current protocols for decision-making authority. Some department heads are unclear about which decisions require board approval and which fall under general management discretion. Rachel felt a flash of anger. William Sterling had clearly been working behind the scenes to undermine her authority, questioning her decisions and creating confusion about her management responsibilities. That is an excellent point, Charles said, and Rachel could hear the controlled irritation in his voice. I will clarify the authority structure in writing to ensure there is no confusion about who has decision-making power for day-to-day operations. The rest of the meeting continued in the same professionally tense atmosphere, with Rachel and Charles managing to conduct necessary business while maintaining an emotional distance that felt both appropriate and devastating. After the other department heads left, Rachel found herself alone with Charles for the first time since their conversation in his apartment. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they could not say in a professional setting. Your expansion proposal sounds promising, Charles said finally, his voice carefully neutral. Thank you, Rachel replied. I think the wedding services division could become a significant revenue center if we position it correctly. I'm sure it will be. Your strategic thinking has been consistently excellent. They were talking about business, but Rachel could hear the subtext in every word. Charles was telling her that he respected her professional abilities, that their personal situation would not affect his evaluation of her work performance. He was being everything she had hoped he would be, professional, appropriate, respectful of the boundaries she had established. So why did it feel like he was cutting her heart out with surgical precision? Charles, she began, then stopped herself. Whatever she had been about to say would cross the professional boundaries they were both trying so hard to maintain. Yes, he prompted, and for just a moment his carefully controlled expression slipped, revealing something that looked like hope. Nothing, Rachel said. It was nothing important. The hope in his eyes died, replaced by the neutral professionalism that had become their new normal. I should get back to work, Rachel said, gathering her meeting materials. Of course. Let me know if you need any resources for the expansion proposal. As Rachel left the conference room, she felt the weight of what she had given up settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. She had chosen to preserve their professional relationship at the expense of their personal happiness, and while she told herself it was the right decision, it felt like the most devastating mistake of her life. Behind her, Charles sat alone in the conference room, staring at the empty chair where the woman he loved had just been sitting, wondering how long he could maintain this facade of professional indifference before it destroyed him completely. The worst part was that Rachel was right. Their working relationship was functioning perfectly. They were both excellent at their jobs. They communicated effectively about business matters, and the hotel was thriving under their combined leadership. But the cost of that professional success was the death of everything personal and meaningful between them, and Charles was beginning to wonder if any amount of business achievement was worth this kind of emotional devastation. As he finally forced himself to leave the conference room and return to his own office, Charles made a decision that would change everything. He was going to fight for Rachel, regardless of her fears and regardless of the professional complications. Some things, he realized, were too important to lose without a fight. Charles Murphy stood outside Rachel's office door for nearly 5 minutes before finally knocking. In the 4 days since their disastrous conversation in his apartment, he had rehearsed this moment dozens of times, but he still was not sure he had found the right words to convince the woman he loved that she was making a terrible mistake. "Come in," Rachel's voice called from inside, and Charles noticed that it lacked the warmth and energy that had always characterized her professional demeanor. Rachel looked up from her computer as he entered, and Charles felt his heart clench at the sight of her. She was still beautiful, still professional, still everything he had fallen in love with, but there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she had been sleeping as poorly as he had. "Charles," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "what can I do for you?" "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. "Not about business. About us." Rachel's composure wavered slightly. "I thought we agreed that there is no us anymore. I thought we decided to keep things strictly professional." "You decided that," Charles said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I never agreed to anything. And Rachel, I'm not going to let you throw away the best thing that has ever happened to either of us because Catherine Whitmore made you feel like you are not good enough for me." "This is not about Catherine Whitmore," Rachel said, though they both knew that was not entirely true. "This is about being realistic about our differences and the complications our relationship would create." "What complications?" Charles asked. "Name one specific, concrete problem that our relationship would create that we cannot solve together." Rachel was quiet for a moment, and Charles could see her searching for arguments that would sound rational rather than fear-based. "The board would use our relationship against both of us," she said finally. "William Sterling is already looking for reasons to question my competence. If he can point to favoritism, William Sterling questioned your competence before we ever had a personal relationship," Charles interrupted. "And you defeated him completely with your presentation. The board voted 6-2 to retain you based on your merits, not because of any favoritism." "The social expectations are meaningless," Charles said firmly. "Rachel, I have been to 1,000 charity galas and country club events. They are performances, nothing more. The people who matter to me, the people whose opinions I actually value, will love you because I love you and because you are an extraordinary person. Your business relationships will be strengthened by having a partner who understands hospitality and customer service better than anyone I have ever met. Rachel, you turned around this hotel's reputation in a matter of weeks. Any business associate who meets you will be impressed by your competence and your character." Rachel looked down at her hands, and Charles could see that she was running out of rational objections, which meant they were getting to the real issue, her own sense of self-worth. "Charles," she said quietly, "what if I am just not enough? What if I try to be the partner you need and I fail? What if I embarrass you or hold you back or prove that Catherine Whitmore was right about me?" Charles stood up and walked around her desk, pulling her gently to her feet and taking her hands in his. "Rachel Evans," he said, looking directly into her eyes, You are the strongest, most capable, most remarkable woman I have ever known. You took a dying hotel and brought it back to life. You faced down a hostile board and won them over with pure competence. You handle crises with grace. You treat every person with dignity, and you make me want to be a better man every single day. But I am still just a receptionist who got lucky, Rachel whispered. No, Charles said firmly. You are a general manager who earned her position through talent and hard work. You are a leader who inspires loyalty and respect. You are my equal in every way that matters, and you are the only partner I want for the rest of my life. Rachel looked up at him, and Charles could see the battle being fought in her eyes between hope and fear. What are you asking me to do? She said. I'm asking you to fight for us, Charles replied. I'm asking you to trust that what we have together is worth whatever challenges we might face. I'm asking you to marry me not because you think you should, but because you cannot imagine living without me any more than I can imagine living without you. Before Rachel could respond, her assistant knocked urgently on the door. Miss Evans, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have an emergency situation. The Blackstone Industries conference is scheduled to begin in 2 hours, and their CEO has just been arrested for securities fraud. The story is breaking on every news channel, and we have reporters in the lobby asking for statements. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. The Blackstone Industries annual conference was the largest corporate event the hotel had booked all year, representing over $500,000 in revenue and involving 300 of the most influential business leaders in the city. How many reporters? She asked, her mind already shifting into crisis management mode. 15 so far, with more arriving every few minutes. Hotel security is trying to keep them in the lobby, but some are attempting to access the conference floors. Rachel looked at Charles, and he could see the exact moment when she made the decision to handle this crisis personally rather than relying on him to solve it for her. I need to manage this situation, she said, her voice taking on the authority that had impressed him from their very first interaction. Charles, I know this affects hotel operations, but I need you to let me handle it without interference. Understood, Charles said, recognizing that she was asking him to trust her competence rather than trying to protect her from a difficult situation. What do you need from me? Access to the legal department and authority to make statements on behalf of the hotel. And Charles, we will continue our personal conversation later, but right now I need to be the general manager, not the woman you are in love with. Charles felt a surge of pride at her professionalism and clarity. This was exactly why he had fallen in love with her. Her ability to prioritize what mattered most and handle any crisis with competence and grace. You have whatever authority you need, he said. Show them what an exceptional manager looks like. As Rachel left her office to handle what could be the biggest crisis of her career, Charles realized that this was exactly the test she needed, an opportunity to prove to herself once and for all that she belonged in this position not because of his favoritism, but because she was the best person for the job. The hotel lobby had been transformed into something resembling a war zone. Television crews had set up equipment near the main entrance. Reporters were interviewing anyone who would speak to them, and hotel guests were struggling to navigate through the chaos to reach the elevators. Rachel surveyed the scene from the mezzanine level, her mind automatically cataloging the problems and potential solutions. The first priority was protecting the hotel's reputation and the privacy of their other guests. The second priority was managing the Blackstone situation in a way that demonstrated the hotel's professionalism and integrity. She descended to the lobby and approached the largest cluster of reporters, her posture confident and her expression serious but calm. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the lobby, I am Rachel Evans, General Manager of the Grandshire Metropolitan. I understand you are here regarding the Blackstone Industries Conference, and I am prepared to make a brief statement. The reporters immediately surrounded her, cameras focusing and microphones extending toward her face. Rachel felt a moment of panic at being the center of so much attention, but she forced herself to remember that she was representing the hotel and its reputation. The Grandshire Metropolitan is aware of the recent news regarding Blackstone Industries, she began. As a matter of policy, we do not comment on the legal affairs of our guests or clients. However, I can confirm that the Blackstone conference has been cancelled, and we are working to accommodate all affected parties. Will the hotel be refunding the conference fees? One reporter called out. All financial arrangements will be handled according to our standard contract terms and in consultation with our legal department, Rachel replied smoothly. Is it true that hotel management was aware of the investigation into Blackstone's CEO? Another reporter demanded. Rachel felt a flash of anger at the suggestion that the hotel had been complicit in any wrongdoing, but she kept her voice steady. The Grandshire Metropolitan conducts business with thousands of corporate clients each year. We are not privy to confidential law enforcement investigations, nor would it be appropriate for us to comment on them. Our relationship with clients is based on providing exceptional hospitality services, not on monitoring their legal affairs. What about the other guests who are staying here during this situation? A third reporter asked. The privacy and comfort of our guests is our highest priority, Rachel said. We are taking steps to ensure that this situation does not interfere with their stay, including enhanced security measures and alternative entrance arrangements for those who prefer to avoid the lobby area. As Rachel fielded questions from the press, she became aware that a crowd of hotel employees and guests had gathered to watch her performance. Among them, she spotted Charles standing near the concierge desk, his expression focused and proud. One final question, Rachel announced after 10 minutes of queries. After this, I will need to return to managing the situation for our guests and staff. Miss Evans, there have been rumors about your qualifications for this position and your relationship with the hotel owner. Do you have any comment on suggestions that you are not qualified to handle a crisis of this magnitude? Rachel felt the question like a slap, but she realized that this was her opportunity to address the whispered criticisms and political attacks that had shadowed her tenure as general manager. My qualifications speak for themselves, she said, looking directly into the cameras. Since my appointment as general manager, this hotel has achieved the highest guest satisfaction scores in its history, increased revenue by 15%, and successfully managed multiple challenging situations, including a major wedding crisis that was resolved to the complete satisfaction of all parties involved. She paused, gathering her thoughts for what she knew would be the most important statement of her career. I earned this position through 3 years of exceptional service in every department of this hotel, combined with a comprehensive understanding of both guest services and hotel operations. I have been evaluated and retained by the board of directors based solely on my professional performance. Any suggestion that my qualifications are inadequate is contradicted by measurable results and the confidence of both my colleagues and my supervisors. The lobby fell silent as Rachel finished her statement. She could see the reporters scribbling notes and the cameras still rolling, but more importantly, she could see the faces of her employees looking at her with something that looked very much like respect and admiration. Thank you for your time, Rachel concluded. The Grandshire Metropolitan will continue to provide exceptional service to all our guests during this situation. As the reporters began to disperse, several hotel employees approached Rachel to offer their support and congratulations on her handling of the crisis. The housekeeping supervisor, a woman who had been with the hotel for 15 years, took Rachel's hand and said, "You did us proud, Miss Evans." That is exactly what this hotel needed to hear. Charles approached her as the crowd began to thin, his expression showing both professional pride and personal admiration. "That was remarkable," he said quietly. "You handled that perfectly." "I had good training," Rachel replied, and for the first time in days, she smiled at him with something approaching warmth. "Rachel," Charles said, "what you just did, the way you represented this hotel and defended your own qualifications, that was leadership. That was exactly what I saw in you the first day we met." Rachel looked around the lobby, which was already returning to its normal, elegant calm as the staff efficiently managed the aftermath of the media circus. She had handled a major crisis with competence and grace. She had defended both the hotel's reputation and her own qualifications, and she had done it without needing Charles to rescue her or solve her problems. For the first time since her promotion, Rachel felt like she truly belonged in the position she held, and for the first time since their conversation in his apartment, she began to wonder if she had been wrong about everything else as well. "Charles," she said quietly, "after I finish managing the Blackstone situation, I think we should continue our conversation from earlier." Charles's face lit up with the first genuine smile she had seen from him in days. "I will be in my office whenever you are ready," he said. As Rachel returned to her duties, she carried with her the memory of how it felt to be completely confident in her own abilities. The crisis had reminded her that she was not just Charles Murphy's girlfriend or the lucky receptionist who got promoted beyond her qualifications. She was Rachel Evans, general manager of a luxury hotel, and she had earned that title through her own competence and dedication. Now she just had to decide if she was brave enough to fight for the personal happiness she had been too afraid to claim. By 9 o'clock that evening, the Blackstone crisis had been fully contained. The conference attendees had been accommodated with alternative arrangements. The media had moved on to other stories, and the hotel had returned to its normal operations. Rachel sat in her office, exhausted but satisfied with how she had handled the situation. Charles knocked on her door at exactly 9:15, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression that was both hopeful and apprehensive. "I thought you might need caffeine," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Thank you," Rachel said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "It has been a very long day." "But a successful one," Charles observed, settling into the chair across from her desk. "The way you handled that crisis was masterful. The board is going to be very impressed when they hear about it." "The board," Rachel said with a slight smile, "can go straight to hell." Charles nearly choked on his coffee. "Excuse me. I have spent weeks worrying about what the board thinks of me, what Catherine Whitmore thinks of me, what everyone in your social circle thinks of me. Today I realize that the only opinion that really matters is my own, and I know I am good at this job." "You are better than good at this job," Charles said. "You are exceptional at this job." Rachel looked at him across the desk. This man who had seen her potential when she could not see it herself, who had given her the opportunity to prove her worth, who had offered her love and partnership and a future she had been too afraid to accept. "Charles," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology." "No, you do not." "Yes, I do," Rachel interrupted. "I let fear make my decisions for me. I let other people's opinions matter more than my own feelings. I convinced myself that I was protecting you, but really, I was just protecting myself from the possibility of failure." Charles leaned forward in his chair, his attention completely focused on her words. "When I was handling that crisis today," Rachel continued, "I realized something important. I did not succeed because I was lucky, or because you helped me, or because I somehow fooled everyone into thinking I was competent. I succeeded because I am competent, because I have worked hard and learned my job and earned the right to be in this position." "I have been trying to tell you that for weeks," Charles said softly. "I know, but I had to figure it out for myself." Rachel stood up and walked around her desk, needing to be closer to him for what she was about to say. "Charles, I love you. I love you completely and desperately and without reservation. And I was an idiot for thinking that love was not enough to overcome whatever challenges we might face." Charles stood as well, his eyes never leaving her face. "What are you saying, Rachel?" "I am saying that if the offer is still open, I would very much like to marry you." Charles reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew the small velvet box that had been there every day since their conversation in his apartment. "The offer," he said, opening the box to reveal the ring she had been too afraid to accept, "will always be open." This time, when Charles knelt in front of her, Rachel did not hesitate. "Rachel Marie Evans," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "will you marry me?" "Yes," Rachel said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you." As Charles slipped the ring onto her finger, Rachel felt as though she was finally coming home to herself. The ring fit perfectly, as though it had been made specifically for her. And when Charles stood and pulled her into his arms, she felt as though all the pieces of her life were finally falling into place. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too," Charles replied, "and Rachel, we are going to be amazing together." As they kissed in her office, surrounded by the work they both loved and the future they were going to build together, Rachel realized that Catherine Whitmore had been wrong about one thing. Sometimes love really was enough to conquer all. The emergency board meeting had been called for 10 o'clock on a Friday morning, exactly 1 week after Charles and Rachel's engagement. William Sterling had requested the meeting, claiming that urgent matters affecting the hotel's reputation and management structure needed to be addressed immediately. Rachel sat at the conference table, her engagement ring catching the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows, her expression calm and confident. Beside her, Charles looked relaxed and slightly amused, as though he was looking forward to whatever William had planned. "Ladies and gentlemen," William began, his voice carrying the kind of self-righteous authority that suggested he believed he was about to deliver a devastating blow. "I have called this meeting to address a situation that threatens the very foundation of professional conduct at this company." Rachel felt her stomach tighten slightly, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had handled hostile board members before, and she could handle them again. "It has come to my attention," William continued, "that Charles Murphy and Rachel Evans have announced their engagement. This relationship represents a clear conflict of interest and a flagrant violation of professional ethics that cannot be tolerated in a company of our stature." "On what grounds?" the board chairman asked, his voice carefully neutral. "On the grounds that Miss Evans's position as general manager was clearly obtained through personal favoritism rather than professional merit," William replied. "The timeline of their relationship, the circumstances of her promotion, and the ongoing preferential treatment she has received all point to a pattern of inappropriate conduct that damages this company's reputation." Charles started to speak, but Rachel placed a gentle hand on his arm, indicating that she wanted to handle this herself. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice steady and professional, "I believe you are entitled to your opinion about my qualifications and my relationship with Mr. Murphy. However, I would like to present some facts that might influence the board's evaluation of the situation." She stood and moved to the presentation screen, her movements confident and purposeful. "First, let me address the timeline question that seems to be central to your concerns," Rachel began, clicking to her first slide. "This document shows every interaction between Mr. Murphy and myself prior to my promotion, including dates, times, and witnesses. As you can see, we had exactly 4 conversations, all of them brief and entirely professional. The slide showed a detailed timeline that was impossible to dispute. Second, let me address the question of preferential treatment, Rachel continued, moving to the next slide. These are my performance metrics as general manager, compared to the performance of every general manager this hotel has had over the past 10 years. The numbers were striking. Under Rachel's management, guest satisfaction had increased more than under any previous manager. Revenue had grown at the fastest rate in the hotel's history, and employee satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. Third, Rachel said, let me address the question of professional conduct. She clicked to a slide showing news coverage from the previous week. When this hotel faced a major crisis involving the Blackstone Industries conference, I handled the situation independently, without assistance from Mr. Murphy, and with results that protected both the hotel's reputation and the interests of our guests. William Sterling's face was growing redder with each slide, but Rachel was not finished. Finally, she said, let me address the question of conflicts of interest. The final slide showed a comprehensive ethics policy that she and Charles had developed together. Mr. Murphy and I have established clear protocols for managing our professional and personal relationships, including third-party oversight of all personnel decisions affecting my position and transparent reporting of any potential conflicts. Rachel closed her laptop and looked around the table at the 8 board members who would decide whether her engagement disqualified her from continuing as general manager. I understand Mr. Sterling's concerns about the appearance of impropriety, she concluded. However, I believe the evidence shows that my relationship with Mr. Murphy began after my promotion, that my performance as general manager has exceeded all expectations, and that we have taken appropriate steps to manage any potential conflicts of interest. She sat down, and the boardroom was silent for a long moment. Miss Evans, the board chairman said finally, your presentation was very thorough. However, Mr. Sterling has raised some valid concerns about the perception of impropriety, regardless of the actual timeline or your performance metrics. Rachel felt her heart sink. Despite everything she had accomplished, despite all the evidence she had presented, the board was still going to side with William Sterling's politics over her professional achievements. Charles started to stand, but once again Rachel stopped him. If she was going to go down, she was going to go down fighting. Mr. Chairman, she said, may I ask a question? Of course. If my gender were different, if I were a male general manager who had become engaged to a female board member or hotel owner, would we be having this conversation? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Rachel could see several board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Furthermore, Rachel continued, if my background were different, if I had come from the right family or attended the right schools or moved in the right social circles, would my qualifications be questioned so extensively? William Sterling started to object, but Rachel kept talking. I have increased this hotel's revenue by 20% in 3 months. I have achieved the highest guest satisfaction scores in the hotel's history. I have successfully managed multiple crises and established operational improvements that will benefit this company for years to come. The question before this board is not whether I am qualified to be general manager. The question is whether you are going to allow personal prejudice and political maneuvering to override objective professional performance. Rachel sat down, her heart pounding, knowing that she'd just put everything on the line. She had directly challenged the board's motivations and called out the discrimination that had been lurking beneath the surface of every attack on her position. The board chairman looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each member before speaking. The board will now vote on a motion to censure Miss Evans for professional misconduct related to her engagement to Mr. Murphy, he announced. Rachel felt the world tilt beneath her. After everything she had accomplished, everything she had proven, they were still going to punish her for falling in love. All in favor of the motion to censure, the chairman called. William Sterling raised his hand, along with one other board member. All opposed. 6 hands went up, including the chairman's own. The motion fails, the chairman announced. Furthermore, I would like to state for the record that the board commends Miss Evans for her exceptional performance as general manager and looks forward to her continued leadership of the Grandshire Metropolitan. Rachel felt tears of relief spring to her eyes as the vote was announced. She had won, not just the vote, but the recognition that her worth was based on her abilities rather than her connections or her conformity to other people's expectations. As the board members filed out of the room, several stopped to congratulate Rachel on her presentation and her performance as manager. William Sterling left without saying anything, his face a mask of fury and defeat. When the room was empty except for Rachel and Charles, he pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. "You were magnificent," he whispered. "Absolutely magnificent." "We won," Rachel said, still hardly believing it. "You won," Charles corrected. "You stood up for yourself, you defended your qualifications, and you proved that you belong here not because of who you love, but because of who you are." As they stood together in the boardroom where Rachel had fought for her professional life twice in 3 months, both victories earned through her own competence and courage, she realized that she had finally become the person she was always meant to be, someone who knew her own worth and was not afraid to fight for it. The wedding of Charles Murphy and Rachel Evans took place on a perfect Saturday afternoon in May, exactly 6 months after their engagement. The ceremony was held in the garden courtyard of the Grandshire Metropolitan, the same space where Rachel had watched Amelia Pemberton get married on the day she first realized she was falling in love with Charles. The guest list was a fascinating mixture of Charles's social and business connections and Rachel's family and friends from the hotel industry. Rachel's mother, Elena, sat in the front row wearing a new dress that Rachel had insisted on buying for her, her eyes bright with tears of pride and joy. Charles's college roommate served as best man, while Rachel's sister from California served as matron of honor. But the most meaningful moment came when the hotel's entire staff, from housekeeping to management, gathered in the lobby to wish the couple well as they left for their honeymoon. These were the people who had watched Rachel grow from a nervous new receptionist to a confident general manager, and their presence meant more to her than any society wedding could have. Catherine Whitmore had been invited to the wedding, though she had declined to attend. She had, however, sent an elegant note acknowledging that she had been wrong about Rachel's suitability as Charles's partner and expressing her hope that they would be very happy together. William Sterling had resigned from the board of directors the week after Rachel's vote of confidence, claiming that he could no longer serve effectively given his philosophical differences with the company's direction. No one was sorry to see him go. As Rachel walked down the aisle in a simple but elegant dress that she had chosen herself, she felt as though she was walking toward everything she had ever wanted, but had been too afraid to believe she deserved. Charles stood waiting for her at the altar, his face radiant with happiness, and when their eyes met, Rachel knew that every challenge they had overcome had been worth this moment. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, officiated by a judge who was a longtime friend of Charles's family. When they exchanged vows, Rachel promised to be Charles's partner in all things, to support his dreams while pursuing her own, and to never let fear make her decisions for her again. Charles promised to love Rachel for exactly who she was, to support her professional ambitions, and to remind her every day of her own worth when she forgot it herself. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, the applause from their guests was thunderous, but Rachel barely heard it. She was focused entirely on Charles, on the kiss they shared as married partners, and on the future they were going to build together. The reception was held in the hotel's grand ballroom, the same space where Rachel had once served drinks as a part-time catering assistant while putting herself through college. Now she was the bride at her own wedding, the general manager of the hotel, and the wife of the man she loved more than she had ever thought possible. During their first dance, Charles pulled her close and whispered in her ear, "Any regrets, Mrs. Murphy?" "Only one," Rachel replied, smiling up at him. "What is that?" "I regret that we wasted so much time being afraid of this," she said. "I regret that I almost let fear keep me from the best thing that ever happened to me." "Well," Charles said, spinning her around the dance floor, "we have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time." As they danced together in the ballroom of the hotel where they had first met, surrounded by everyone who mattered to them, Rachel realized that her story had become exactly what she had always dreamed it could be. A tale of hard work, rewarded, love triumphant, and two people who had found in each other the missing pieces of themselves. 1 year later, Rachel Murphy stood in the same boardroom where she had once fought for her professional life, but this time she was there to present the hotel's most successful annual report in its 50-year history. The Grandshire Metropolitan had not only recovered from the challenges of the previous year, but had become the most highly rated luxury hotel in the city. The wedding services division that Rachel had proposed was now generating 30% of the hotel's event revenue. Guest satisfaction scores had reached unprecedented levels. Staff turnover had dropped to the lowest rate in the industry, and the hotel had been featured in 3 major hospitality publications as an example of exceptional management and customer service. "These results," Rachel told the board, "represent what happens when you combine strategic thinking with genuine care for both guests and employees. We have proven that profitability and humanity are not mutually exclusive, and that treating people with dignity and respect is not just the right thing to do, but also the most successful business strategy." Charles watched his wife present her findings with the same pride he had felt the first day he offered her the general manager position. She had grown into the role completely, developing not just the technical skills of hotel management, but the confidence and authority that made her a true leader. After the board meeting, they walked together through the hotel lobby, greeting staff members and checking on guest services with the kind of hands-on attention that had become their signature management style. "Mrs. Murphy," the afternoon desk clerk called out as they passed the reception area, "the Henderson wedding party just checked in, and they specifically requested to thank you for the planning services. They said working with our team made their wedding planning completely stress-free." Rachel smiled, remembering her own wedding planning and how different it had been from the elaborate corporate events she now helped coordinate on a regular basis. "That is wonderful to hear," she replied. "Please make sure the planning team knows how much their work is appreciated." As they continued their walk through the hotel, Charles reflected on how much their lives had changed in the 2 years since he had first walked into the lobby, disguised as a down-on-his-luck traveler. He had been looking for authentic human character, and he had found it in the most unexpected place, a young woman with a kind heart and an unshakable commitment to treating every person with dignity. "What are you thinking about?" Rachel asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. "I was thinking about that first day," Charles said, "when you offered me a glass of water and changed both our lives forever." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Margaret had been more pleasant that day?" Rachel asked. "If she had treated you with basic courtesy instead of contempt?" Charles considered the question seriously. "I think I still would have noticed you," he said finally. "Maybe not as dramatically, but I think I would have recognized something special about the way you treated people. The kindness was not an exception, Rachel. It was who you are." They paused at the entrance to the garden courtyard where they had been married, looking out at the space that held so many meaningful memories for both of them. "Charles," Rachel said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Rachel smiled, her eyes bright with a secret she had been keeping for several days. "I went to the doctor yesterday," she said. "We are going to have a baby." Charles stared at her for a moment, his face cycling through surprise, joy, and something that looked very much like wonder. "A baby," he repeated. "A baby," Rachel confirmed, "due in about 7 months. Charles pulled her into his arms and spun her around right there in the hotel lobby, not caring who saw them or what anyone might think about the professional appropriateness of their public display of affection. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of amazement and happiness. "Yes, we are," Rachel replied, laughing at his excitement. "And that baby is going to grow up knowing that kindness matters, that hard work pays off, and that love really can conquer all." As they stood together in the lobby of the hotel that had brought them together, surrounded by the business they had built as partners, and facing a future that promised even greater happiness, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started as a receptionist with big dreams and a kind heart. She had become a general manager through merit and determination. She had found love with a man who saw her worth when she could not see it herself. And now she was going to be a mother, raising a child who would learn from the very beginning that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. It was, Rachel thought, exactly the kind of story she had always hoped her life would become, one where the good guys win, where love conquers fear, and where kindness is always rewarded in the end. "Mrs. Murphy," Charles said, taking her hand and intertwining their fingers, "shall we go home?" "Yes," Rachel replied, looking around the hotel lobby one more time, seeing it not as the place where she worked, but as the place where her real life had begun. "Let us go home." As they walked out of the Grandshire Metropolitan together, hand in hand, embarking on the next chapter of their extraordinary love story, Rachel carried with her the knowledge that she had become exactly who she was always meant to be, a woman who knew her own worth, who fought for what mattered, and who never ever forgot the power of offering someone a simple glass of water when they needed it most. Some stories, she realized, really do have fairy tale endings. Sometimes the prince really does recognize the princess, even when she is disguised as an ordinary person just trying to do her job well. And sometimes, if you are very lucky and very brave, love really is enough to overcome every obstacle and create the happily ever after you never dared to dream was possible. The end was really just the beginning. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.